All right.
Okay, so I'd like to call to order the regular committee meeting of the Finance Committee, Monday, June 1st at approximately 5:01 p.m. Can I have a roll call, please?
Yes, sir. Chair Romana Beta,
Here.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Here.
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Here.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Present.
Counselor Jamie Cassette Sanchez.
Here.
You have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Okay, our next item is approval of the agenda. Are there any changes from staff?
No changes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any changes from the committee? Can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Yes, sir. Chair Romana Beta,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Gotta get faster on the mute button. Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassette Sanchez.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, approval of the consent agenda is next. What items would we like to pull off the consent agenda? Counselor Romero Worth.
I am pulling off 7B for an amendment.
Okay, does anyone need to pull up 7A? Okay, so then can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda with the amendment removing item 7B?
Motion to approve is amended.
Second.
Okay, can I have a roll call, please?
Chair Romana Beta,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassette Sanchez.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, approval of the minutes, the regular finance committee meeting minutes of May 18th, 2020. Are there any changes from the staff?
No changes, Mr. Chairman.
Anything from the committee? Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, can I have a roll call?
Chair Romana Beta,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal, sorry, Counselor Jamie Cassette Sanchez.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, so that brings us to our item that was pulled from the consent agenda. This is consideration of bill number 2020-10, an ordinance creating a new section 20-7 SDC 1987 regarding the use of face coverings by employees and customers when inside places of business and by all members of the public when in public places where social distancing is not possible, and establishing an effective date of the bill adoption. Councilwoman Romero Worth.
So I believe you all have received today an amendment that does two things. It makes the first violation of this new section punishable by a warning, and any subsequent violations would be fines of $50 for each violation after the first violation, which would be, of course, the first violation would be just a warning. And then it also adjusts the age from 10 years to 15 that people would be required within the city limits to wear a face covering of some sort.
Okay,
And
Councilor.
I guess okay, yeah, that's all I have.
Okay, Councilor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. Councilor Romero Worth, I'm curious if we have any leeway within this to not make this be a petty misdemeanor. I think that ends up being on people's record. Can it be some kind of a citation, like a, I don't know, speeding or just a violation rather than a petty misdemeanor? Is that something we could have a conversation about?
So I would like to bring the city attorney in. I see she's on the meeting, if she's
Oh, thank you.
available. The way this is set up is that it is not a civil penalty, but under our criminal statute, correct?
So it would be a misdemeanor, so that is a criminal violation. It's similar to, so under the mayor's order right now as well, any violation of the emergency orders are also misdemeanors. So it's consistent with that. If we did want to do a civil citation, we would just need to create an additional section about some sort of administrative appeal process that would have to happen at the city level. That would be appealable to the district court.
And this, Aaron, if I can, so the state has something called a penalty misdemeanor in their structure. I don't know what that means. I mean, it is under their criminal statute, not under their civil, and I don't know if that's something that could be added and if that would change anything to address Councilor Lindell's question.
Councilor Romero-Worth, Chairman Abeyta, I'm not sure if it would address the concern about it being a criminal citation. And I could do some research about what the difference is between a misdemeanor versus, I'm not sure if they're versus a misdemeanor penalty. Is that what you had said?
Yeah.
I'm not familiar myself on that distinction, but I could look into it. But if it's under the criminal code at the state level, I think it would still be some sort of criminal penalty.
Right, and it's like I believe the cell phone texting while driving is under the criminal statute, both at the city level and at the state level. So this is not without precedent. Seatbelt ordinances, traffic ordinances are criminal, not civil. So you can get petty misdemeanors for a variety of offenses under both the city and state code.
Councilor or Chairman Abeyta, Councilor Romero-Worth, I think something else to think about is the type of crime that's typically asked about if you've had a record is often the felony level conviction. This would certainly not rise to that level, but a misdemeanor is a criminal penalty.
Right, so it's not one of the things that would prevent you from, say, getting a job, that kind of thing. That's usually they're looking for felonies, not for petty misdemeanors.
Councilor Lindell, I think you're on mute still.
Thank you, Chair. It's just something that I'd like to have a little bit more discussion about. I know that we went from, we did the whole thing with decriminalizing pot. I just don't feel like having any kind of a criminal record for a person for not wearing their mask. I mean, gee, I got a cell phone ticket one time. I didn't know that I had a record now. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. I don't know. I know I paid a fine. I just, you know, I don't want to stop this, but I'd like to have more discussion about it. I mean, I support this. I think it's the right thing to do. Wearing a face covering, is it inconvenient for me? Yeah, just like everybody else. Do I find it pleasant? Nope, I don't. But I do it cheerfully and respectfully because I think I'm protecting other people. And I just, like I said, I don't want to stop this on principle. I support it. I just like to try to find a way around perhaps having a criminal record, especially for, you know, for somebody like me, it's probably not that big a deal. I don't want that to happen to a 17-year-old. So that's kind of where I'm at with this. And I'm willing to certainly see it through this committee, but I'd like to be able to have a conversation about it.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Councilwoman Villarreal.
Sorry, I'm being lazy and not raising my hand, my virtual hand. I think the additions, the amendments make sense, and some of the word changes were just, can you elaborate a little bit more on those word changes, just so we know the context? Because I wasn't able to compare the documents between the amendment and the original.
I would,
There was
I would
one
defer
other.
to- yeah, I would defer to Jesse on that.
Okay, and then there was the last one about at the recommendation applies to the city. If you could talk about that also.
What was the
Go
first
ahead.
part of your question? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just wanted to know what the word changes were. Because I couldn't compare, I didn't have time to compare this one. From,
Okay.
if you could just walk us through those minor ones, just so we know.
Okay, so 3 and 4.
Yes, and then 5 also, just to explain it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Where are we? It's sort of technical, so it would just say the public health protection ordinance shall go into effect immediately upon its adoption, and shall expire instead of will expire when the CDC withdraws its face covering recommendation related to the pandemic, as that recommendation applies to the city. So that's how that last paragraph would read.
Thank you for reading it out. It's helpful. And I actually agree with my colleague, Councilwoman Lindell, just to understand that, because how to better structure it legally, because I agree, having a record for that doesn't make sense to me. So I think at the next, this goes on to council, right, for a public hearing next week?
Yeah. Yes,
So we can get that before next week so we can understand it better instead of I'd prefer not having any last minute information before we go into council. That would be helpful. And that's it. Thank you.
okay, Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I was actually curious why we decided on age 15. I know that was a discussion in quality of life. So following up on that conversation, why was 15 the age that was decided upon for who would be wearing a mask?
This is my thinking. Of course, it's up to the governing body. I thought about removing age altogether. And I decided that 15 was probably the right place to put this, because I have been getting emails, and maybe you all have too, of pictures of young people not wearing masks. And I think we need to send a message that we're serious about this. This is something we want to see everybody doing. It's one of the very few things we have, one of the few tools we have to prevent the spread of this virus, because we don't have a vaccine. And, I think kids younger than 15, that's up to their parents. I leave their parents to decide whether they are in situations that require a mask. And I leave that to parents to decide what's in the best interest of their kids. But I feel like when you're 15, you're starting to get some independence. Maybe you're on a skateboard around town, or a bike, or you're out and about on your own. And we certainly have other rules or laws that apply to 15, 16 and up, to minors essentially. And it seemed like the right place to put it. But again, the governing body could decide not to put an age. The state emergency order that the governor has in place says anybody 2 or older has to wear a mask. But we would be saying in the city of Santa Fe, our law says anybody 15 or older. And if you don't do that, then you would be subject to a $50 fine on your second offense. Your first offense, again, would be a warning. We have the mayor's Santa Fe promise in place. There's a lot of education going around about the importance of wearing a mask and what that does in terms of preventing the spread of the virus. And I think that I'm hopeful that we can mostly get people to comply because they realize it's in the best interest of themselves and the community at large, and get, you know, folks to just do it voluntarily. But to the extent that we have people coming here from other places who may have different rules, I think it's incumbent that we stress how serious we are about wearing a face covering. And I would, as long as we're on the subject, I would just throw out that if you look at our cell phone laws for texting while driving, we, the state, I believe the state law is if you're caught texting while driving, it's like a $25 fine for a first offense. And if you're texting while driving within the city limits, we as a policy decision have said that your fine will be $200. So just so you understand that, you know, we can, as a locality, decide what we want. And, you know, we can also decide what the age is. But that was my thinking around age.
Okay, thank you so much. I don't disagree with it. And I, you know, when looking at that perspective of when do people start to really make independent decisions, you know, 15 is around that time. And absolutely, it doesn't prevent parents deciding that their younger children should be wearing a mask and are mature enough to be wearing the mask appropriately. So thank you so much for providing that explanation for how you came to that particular age. That was all.
Okay, what is the pleasure of the committee?
I'd move to approve.
Okay, and does your okay, and second, for discussion, your motion includes obviously doing, you know, taking what was said into account and trying to get as much of those things worked out between now and council.
Yeah, we'll try to get some more information and so that everybody understands the penalty structure and why it's done that way. And, you know, if we wanted to go another route, what the trade-offs are there.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion?
I would also, if I could, Mr. Chair, just add that, you know, every year at the legislature, we argue for local control. We argue that we want to set our own rules within our own community. And in fact, we fight very hard for any legislation that preempts us from doing that. And I would say that, you know, one of the areas where we have been prevented or where preemption has come into play is around local rules around gun safety. And I know we've been very frustrated with that. And so I just want to also let people know that I think, you know, the fact that we're making our own rules and that we're, you know, having local control over what we think is best for the nature of our community, which is very much a tourist community, we're understanding from our finance committee discussions. You know, this is very important because we have a lot of folks coming out of town. It's also important for our workers who service not only those of us who live here, but those people who come from out of town, who spend you know, all day, their entire work day, 7 days a week, 5 days a week in buildings, and people coming in with different ideas about whether they need a mask or not. I think to protect our workers who spend more time in these buildings and therefore are more susceptible to this virus as a result, this is an important thing for us to say as a community, to make a policy decision that this is important for us and this is something we want to do. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr.
Okay, thank you. Yeah,
The counselor's motion should be as amended. Approve as amended.
For the,
Approval of this item would be to
Well,
approve it as amended.
are we voting on the amendment or on the bill?
It would be one vote.
I thought I was moving the amendment, but I'm happy to move, I'm happy to move approval of the bill as amended.
Okay, and that's the same with the second.
Second, yes, Steph.
Okay, can I have a roll call, please?
Yes. Counselor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes,
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes,
Counselor Jamie Cassette Sanchez,
Yes.
Chair Romana Beta.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, then we are on to item 8, which is a presentation. 8A is our budget update. Mary McCoy.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today we have joining us Christine Mahelzak from our Council and Constituent Services group, as well as Bradley Flitch and Alex with his beautiful puppy, and Alexis Lotero from our budget office as well. So here we are as we have been meeting every 2 weeks to review, provide a budget update and to review any updated data that we have, go into more in-depth and particular conversations. As you will recall, and we have our city manager joining us, Jarell LePan Hill, as well as our city attorney, Aaron McSherry. Sorry, I forgot those two. And tonight we are going to be reviewing with you 2 important updates. Christine will be presenting the survey updates that her office led in our community. As we mentioned a few months ago when we started this very unconventional process, is that we are going to have to rely on additional tools to help us as we proceed forward, as we plan for our FY21 budget. Community, constituent engagement, employee engagement, council engagement to a very different extent as we prepare our budget was one of those key points that we started out with a few months ago. So Christine will be providing us an update of the survey. And then we'll be moving forward with an update on more detailed revenues for FY21. And Brad will lead us through that. And then we'll review some expenditure options as a starting point. And again, this is a very, very different time as we are adjusting to a new reality, wearing face masks, as you all were discussing in the previous item, looking for hand sanitizer at every entrance or exit of a building, calling in to-go orders for our local stores or our favorite restaurants. This is really a new normal that we are facing. It's almost as if we have a paradigm shift as we continue into this new normal phase. And it's absolutely devastating and heartbreaking that our financial reality as a result of the coronavirus pandemic are forcing us to making changes to the structure of our government. As we're moving forward, however, with these tough decisions, our commitment is to treat the process and the people impacted with fairness and respect, whether it's our employees or our constituents that we serve. So prior to this meetings, we discussed the FY21 revenue decline in general terms and the structural imbalance that we face. So Brad will dive into more detail tonight about our revenue assumptions and the initial revenue estimates for FY21. As Councilor Romero Worth mentioned earlier, our city relies heavily on tax revenue that is generated by our city's tourism and hospitality industries. So as we as these tax sources have been reduced drastically during our shutdown, we expect continued reduction from FY20 levels as we move forward, even as the stay-at-home orders are relaxed. So Brad will go into that detail. And in the coming weeks, as we prepare our FY21 budget, the expenditure side of the budget, we will begin reviewing with you all possible scenarios for continuing our operations. And that's really why Christine's presentation tonight of our survey results is so key as a context, setting the context and as the first step as we move into the next few months of budget deliberations. And just to end this intro, I think during this time in our new normal, we're all having to be flexible and nimble to be creative and innovative as we face this structural imbalance, as we all face a new normal in our community. So we want to make this the most constructive deliberations as we move forward, always with an eye of making our government better, not smaller, but better and more creative and innovative. And a great example that I believe that our city manager, LaPan Hills, shared with you during the last council meeting is our move towards the e-government, the ability to offer online payments for our InterGov online permitting system. Those are the types of examples that we look forward to sharing with you as we are moving forward and being flexible and nimble, creative and innovative as we move forward in this process. So thank you for indulging me on a few minutes of an intro to set that context. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Christine to share the survey process and results with us.
Awesome, thank you, Mary. And Jennifer is actually going to join us as well. Jennifer Fabian, she's our council liaison, and she helped extensively with the survey. So we basically created a quick slide deck to walk you through the survey, and Jen's going to do the screen share on that. I'll let her kick that off. There we go. So just a really quick high-level overview of the citizen survey results and the intent of the survey. As Mary mentioned, you know, the government and my office have been working for ways to engage with our residents. Survey is a new innovative way to do that type of engagement. The intent of the survey was most definitely to gain a high-level overview of our residents' priorities and just create a new way of engagement and communication. This is definitely a time where we needed to add insight as we navigate a new budget process, as Mary mentioned. So I do want to stress that, again, the survey was not meant to be a decision-making document or survey. The results, that was not the intent of them, but really an opportunity to create a starting point for us as we move forward. And we can use the information we gathered to help better prepare information for the council. So moving forward, I just want to stress that, you know, would like to continue to using I would like to continue to use surveys as an engagement opportunity. We will continue to cross-check our demographic information against, you know, other data, including the census data, and we will continue to collect information from the public, grow our outreach, and learn from it. You know, this was, I want to highlight, the very first time that our city has done this type of survey, and we absolutely feel like there's so much to learn and so many ways to grow and get better at this. But as you'll see on the next slide, I just want to give a quick perspective. We had over 5,500 total responses, which is amazing. We're highlighting here that 4,000 of the residents that responded were within city limits, and that's about 5% of our total population. And just as a quick example, we showed some response interaction with other cities who did very similar outreach for their survey participation, and you'll see that Sacramento has a population of 508,000. They had 95 responses to theirs. So again, I want to emphasize the thousands of people that responded to ours. There was a survey from Virginia with population was 25,000 people. And again, they had less than 1,000 responses. Still a great response rate for their population, but we're really excited with the response rate that we received and couldn't be more grateful for the community and really their participation. So just quickly going over the survey questions. Again, this is, I'll mention on a few more slides, but these are just a quick walkthrough. You know, we really emphasize like what should the highest priority of the city be when allocating scarce resources. some of the priorities for economic recovery. As we all know, the pandemic was the first kind of, that was the first issue, and the second is the economic impact for us. And then again, moving forward to, you know, if we had to scale back community facilities, what would be the most preferable, and city employee related cost savings. And then we also asked a series of demographic questions so that we could really start to create a baseline of data moving forward. I will go to that on the next slide, which just kind of gives a comparison of the demographic information. You'll see the census is where we are on all of these categories in blue, and then our survey is in the light pink purple color. But really the part that we want to spend the most time on is the online dashboard. So the dashboard is available on our website. It's an interactive way to view the results and the data that we collected. It is under the home page, and residents can click on it with filters to view the survey responses specific to certain criteria. So we'll go ahead and switch over to the dashboard for that, and just give a quick overview of what this looks like. Again, the demographic data is on the initial landing, and then you can click through and filter by district or by question. So I don't know, counselors, if there's anything specific that you want us to bring up to preview, or if there's any questions you have specific to some of the data that's been collected and presented.
Christine, can you go over some of the questions and the responses we got?
Yeah, absolutely. So just kind of going through, if we were to start with the first question and leave it completely unfiltered, what that would look like. So when we did an overview of what was most important to residents, really a lot of what you'll see is that our core functions are very, very important to them. We can walk through some of the other ones when we said, you know, what should the city prioritize? I think you guys are looking at the same screen. Oh, there we go. Maintaining fully functioning city services such as streets. Those came in with high feedback. We also talked a little bit about capital projects and infrastructure, and what some of the projects in the districts looked like: airport improvements, recreation facility improvements. The other question, I think, counselor, that we kind of looked through is, you know, general city maintenance, how important things were for individuals. So we found that, you know, things like potholes and street maintenance came in very important. Our trash and recycling also scored very high. Our curbside trash and recycling, weeds and maintenance were also on there. Other things of note were, you know, where some of our public communication, I think our newsletters, press releases, policy research and support. One of the areas and questions that we also asked was specific to, you know, if we had to look at closing some facilities. Of course, the one that scored the highest with that was really a combination of both facilities, but kind of gives you an overview of where some of these scored in general. And I think, again, the whole intent of the survey was to start to give us an idea and collect data that we've never had before. So we've never actually done a survey where 5,000 people have responded and said, you know, this is kind of what we feel city government is, and this is what we feel some of our priorities are. I think really what myself and Jennifer are looking forward to doing is helping the council kind of utilize this type of data as we move into the budget process. And if we've talked about mini surveys moving forward and some additional, this is really the first time we've tried this. And so I want to emphasize that we want to continue using this outreach tool in the future. We had a really great response, and I think it's a great way to capitalize on engaging with our constituents.
Thank you, Christine. I appreciate you doing the survey. I think it's a good start, but I think what the other thing that this survey, this first start showed us was when you look at the respondents, over half were 55 years or older, and 72% identified themselves as white or Caucasian. And so we need to figure out how to engage the Hispanic, Latino residents that we have and the younger residents. And then when you look at the districts, obviously District 1 and 2, we had the most responses from. 4 was third, and then District 3. And a lot of times when you do polling, you won't complete the poll until you get a certain number from each district, say, so that you know that you're not having one segment of your population controlling or dictating what happens for the rest. So I think our challenge moving forward is going to be, how do we engage in our next surveys the residents and the demographics that didn't engage in this one?
Absolutely. And Counselor, I do want to note that we are able with the dashboard to pull out very specific. So we could filter just based on like the Hispanic and Latino ethnicity. We had over almost, let's see, I think Jen's going to do that. The response rate was comparable to 33% of our responses. So we actually have a really good understanding of what I hear what you're saying. I agree. We need to do a better job with outreach, but we were also really excited with the dashboard and the ability to kind of segregate out some of the responses, and felt really confident with the fact that we still had almost 1,000 responses from that population. So
on that point, you can take, I think what you're saying also is you can take for example, the Hispanic, Latino responses only to these questions and see what their responses were. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Good.
Right
Now, sorry, I'm going to butt in because I'm the one controlling the dashboard.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you look here, we have Hispanic or Latino highlighted. So basically what that does, it filters the entire dashboard. So as we look through, we're only seeing the Latino, Hispanic responses, which is really cool. You can toggle it kind of on and off and see how the responses might change between questions. So I think that's one of the really cool things about having the data, presented like this and available. And I also think we were trying to come up with ways where, even though the responses don't match the population exactly, like we didn't get a representative sample, we're not trying to lump them in with the rest. We're not trying to, hide the younger populations within the older populations or the minority populations within the white community. We have ways where we can pull out their responses and let their voices be heard on their own, as well as, within the larger Santa Fe community.
That's awesome. Great. Anything from the committee? Councilor Lindell, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to confirm with Jennifer that this is now being able to filter it and look at it in all these different ways is available to us on our, what do you call the site? Our dashboard?
Yeah, so this is on ArcGIS, but this is also completely public. So this was posted on the city website a couple hours ago. So it is there. This is completely public. Anybody can go in and start playing with the data.
Okay, can this be put on the like survey results? Can this be put right on the front page of the website so everybody can get a look at it?
Counselor, it is available on the homepage of the website.
Okay.
It's already been uploaded, and there is a call out box for it. And it's also The exact same function. It's completely public.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, I can't see the participants right now, so if you want to ask questions, okay, there we go.
Oh, there we go,
Anything
Jen.
else from the committee? No, Councillor Villarreal, did you have a
Oh,
question?
thank you. Just wanted to thank you all for putting it on the website and being able to toggle between different either demographics or questions. And I think it's good to be able to see the breakdown of that. That will be helpful. So if you can, did we promote this on social media that the results were in and they were just making sure that people understood it was setting a context? It didn't necessarily mean that these were the recommendations we were going by, and also that it wasn't representative of our demographics. It was as we say, like a snapshot of the population. So is that on social media?
It will be tomorrow, Counselor. We worked to get it available on the website, and then the press release announcing the survey results will go tomorrow with the information on our social media.
Excellent. And I guess what I found interesting, based on who participated, I'm looking at the document that has it all laid out in a PDF. But I was surprised by, not surprised, but based on the population that participated and demographics, I was surprised that the golf course was not seen as important service or amenity for our city as much as maybe others would have thought, or that we've been hearing from. And then just some other interesting points to make about priorities, and tourism wasn't one of them based on the data that we collected. These are just points that I thought were interesting and would want to understand more. But yeah, I was actually surprised by some of the responses, considering the demographics and the people that did participate. So I think it's good to have some other rounds of ways to get the pulse of our community. Surveys aren't always the easiest for working families, and if they don't access online social media aspects, that they don't necessarily hear about this. Yeah, I'm not always a fan of surveys, but I guess it's again, like I said, it's a piece of it just to hear from parts of District 1 and District 2 primarily. But I think it was good to see that, like, just to kind of get a pulse of certain aspects of our community. So thank you for administering this, and look forward to being able to weigh in on some of the questions we want to ask for the next round of possible surveys. Thank you.
All right, Councilwoman Casas Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I echo some of Councilwoman Villarreal's observations that it was really interesting. I also found it really interesting how much affordable housing was really up there, and making sure we're focusing on those. So I am really looking forward to opportunities to really dive in, and I'm curious what the timeline is. What are we thinking in terms of when are these surveys going to be going out? Do we have, I know from previous discussions, we're really going to be hammering down. So we'll be looking at, correct me if I'm wrong, economic development in one. We'll be looking at parks and recreation. We'll be looking at community services components, and we'll be getting more details on those areas of our city government. Is that correct for next steps?
Councilor Chair, Councilor Casas Sanchez, yes, that's the intent, is to kind of look through this and see if there's working with the council committees. What I'm hoping to get over the next 3 nights, and then also through our engagement, is to kind of look at areas where we would want to do a deeper dive, and maybe a series of additional questions to get a better understanding. But also, I think for us, we often hear, I know my office also about very specific issues. And it was interesting to have, 5,000 responses on a topic gives kind of a different perspective. And so, like I mentioned, we're running all of this simultaneously, but absolutely, I'm looking for that type of input tonight. And then also over the next few days, I would like to touch base with all of you to see if there's questions moving forward that we can incorporate into a next round of surveys.
Wonderful. And I think that it'll also be interesting after Finance's presentation to see how we align this. As we mentioned, this is not the only tool we are utilizing to make decisions, but it is a key component. And so I really am looking forward to how we can really align this as best as possible to help inform our decisions, not make our decisions, but help inform them. A couple questions about some of the data. Do people know what district they're in? Because I frequently talk to people and they have no idea what district they're in. So are we sure that those numbers are accurate? Did we have any way to compare it?
Councilor Chair, Councilor Cassett Sanchez, we provided a map for individuals, but I think that was also, some of the stuff that we're working through is probably turning on a location request and asking people to access where their device location is. Of course, there's always some give and take if you're, doing the survey not in your home and so forth, but we did provide a map just so that everyone could kind of check, at least at a high level, what district they were in.
Okay, great, because that's a frequent conversation I have with people of, I know you're a counselor, I have no idea if you're my counselor. In terms of increasing our numbers, I think we've talked about this a bit before, of how to grow our city mailing list. And especially right now, as we are moving to very much an e-government structure. We're completely e-government right now, and we can expect for a time being that we're really going to be relying on technology. Are we looking at different ways that we can expand that mailing list for surveys such as this one, as well as our district newsletters, other things that the city might be sending out emails for? What are some of those ideas?
Again, Councilor Chair, Councilor Cassett Sanchez, we are, and I did not include this in this slide, but all of the district news emails that we had, the survey was sent to everyone's district, everyone's distribution with the links. So we did do that. We've started to utilize the campaign on our social media for the newsletter signups, and we've been mentioning it throughout some of our other signups, or when we're doing some promos. We're looking at doing an insert in our our utility bills as well. But we are looking at ways to start really expanding our email distributions, because that's traditionally something we haven't used. In fact, when I came on board with the city, that was probably the first thing I stood up was ways to gather email addresses. And so it's most definitely a work in progress, but we're actively looking to do that because it's such a great way to engage with our residents. And I would just add note to that. I would love if the counselors with social media also shared that information and asked residents to sign up if they want to hear from them, because I think you all have such great social media as well. And it's really helpful when constituents know that it's really coming from our counselors. It's really great. We get positive feedback. And I know you've seen that in some of the emails. Our residents really appreciate that type of outreach.
Yeah, that was actually going to be one of my questions, is that when things get posted on social media, I don't always see it. I admittedly am not the best millennial with social media. I'll work harder. But that would be something that would be useful if you guys can let us know, hey, this post is here, so we can at least share it. I also had a couple ideas about collecting emails, one potentially with the CRM, as people are putting in requests. The other would be, it'd be great if we had a little tagline, and we can definitely create this ourselves, but in our city council, our signatures on our emails that can say, sign up for the District 4 newsletter. So every time I respond to a constituent, so that's something that we can do, but I just want to, confer with you guys. Coordinate.
Good
Yeah.
idea.
Great.
Okay, anything else from the committee regarding the survey? Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Okay, Mary, go ahead.
Okay, great. I'm gonna ask Brad to be our slide driver for the FY21 budget update. You all received this in an email earlier today. It's the same presentation as Brad is pulling that up. Can walk you through. Again, we're going to be presenting the revenue slides, some more detail on revenue, as well as some starting options and some context for making those tough decisions about how to restructure the expenditures for city government.
Is that visible?
Yes, it's white with a pencil or something.
Try that again. There we go. Is that visible?
Yes.
It is.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brad. So we're going to be first starting out on the second page of the presentation with some context setting about our revenue forecasting as we move forward. So next slide, please.
Okay, and then as we go, Mary, if the committee can please raise your virtual hand and we can stop where we're at and ask questions as we go.
Great.
That's great. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Great idea. So as we've talked about several times before, these are really unprecedented times that we're living through, not just with the pandemic, but with the economic crisis we are facing, as well as the fiscal crisis that we are facing as a city. So really our goal is to address this uncertainty, despite the duration or the depth that we see going forward. And I've mentioned this before, and Brad will mention this during his detail on the revenue, but no data that we have over historical data will be able to tell any of us how the next 12 months will roll out, whether our revenues will come in higher than what we are estimating now, or they will come in lower. So what we're going to review with you now is the different factors that we are considering as we're moving forward into the next 12 months. When different sectors of our economy may reopen, how they are reopening, and at what capacity they may reopen. And this, as I've been describing it to several individuals, it's like an accordion. We expect our economy to expand and contract as we are dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. And each time it starts to expand or contract based on the virus, we can use these three different factors to guide us through our revenue estimates. So we will continue to monitor cash receipts, take micro samples for our forecasting, as well as continuously amend this forecast when that data becomes available. And of course, I think it is extremely important to reiterate that we're monitoring all of the different sectors of our economy, but we're also keeping track and monitoring for the effects of a second wave, which, as Brad will go over in his revenue assumptions, it's really the month of April 2020. That was when our economy really went into a shutdown. We had the full effect of a full month of the stay-at-home order, and that is what we're using as our baseline as we move forward for if we experience a second wave or a third wave going into the next fiscal year. So again, the main theme here is that we're going to continuously reassess our situation, and we're really having to be flexible, nimble, and adapt at each point as we go forward. So next slide, please. And again, here, this really talks to the flexibility As you all know, annual budget is a difficult enough process as we're doing our revenue estimating, deciding what our values and our priorities are for a budget process. So what we're asking this community and this and the council to move into over the next 12 months is a quarterly budget. We're going to take the first stab at it over the next the month of June and the month of July, so we can submit a revised, balanced FY21 budget by July 31st. But what this actually means through the course of FY21 is what we have highlighted on slide 3. Quarter 1 will end at the end of September, and then we'll take the accounting division, we'll lead the city through a quarter close throughout the month of October. While we're doing that, through the first of our budget adjustments will be brought forward to council in the month of November. And again, here, this is the accordion effect. If we see our revenues expanding, we can make those adjustments on the expenditure side. Or if we see a further contraction as we're monitoring the revenues on a monthly basis, we will have to be able to bring another package forward about reducing the service level as we go forward. So these are the 3 different points in time when we expect to be able to bring these budget adjustments forward. Brad, if you can switch to the next slide. So I'm going to ask Brad to walk us through some updates in our local economy and some of the statistics that we're using as the real-time data as he takes us into the in-depth dive on our revenue, FY21 revenue estimates.
Thank you, Mary. As you can see that, and we gathered these statistics, these were in the New Mexican, that the hotel occupancy for April was down 15.1, or it was 15.1%, down from 63.8% in April 2019. So, I mean, you're seeing, you know, a substantial decrease in hotel occupancy during the shutdown during April. Again, in April, and we hope to update to May data. Today's June 1st, so we're hoping that in the next week we can update these here to May data, but I know that some of the data doesn't come until like the 15th, 16th, 17th of June. But we had a 98% decline in traffic at the airport, you know, from 21,000 to 502. The Department of Workforce Solutions have been producing weekly initial claims. It doesn't tell us how many people of those who claimed unemployment have went back to work, but we know in the last 10 weeks, 13,731 of our co-workers have filed for initial claims of unemployment. Some of them hopefully have went back to work. We don't know yet. But when you think of a total workforce of 76,000, you know, you're talking 15, 20% of our workforce is unemployed right now. And when you start really thinking of the economic ramifications of having that much of your workforce unemployed, how does that impact GRT? Number one, how does that impact GRT? But also, what happens to franchise fees, you know, use of electricity, water, sewer, cable TV? Also, you know, what happens to the use of utilities? What happens to the use of all of our businesses? So each one of these economic data points is really maybe insignificant by itself, but when you look at it collectively, you really start to see some significant economic strain. And not to go too deep into the weeds about economics, but, you know, the money multiplier, you know, if you spend a new dollar that comes into Santa Fe from tourists or from anybody, you know, how does that dollar multiply through the economy? And when you don't get that dollar, how does that non-dollar multiply through the economy? And that is really the key to why we are different from the rest of New Mexico. Our economy is very different. And I think in these next couple slides, I'll show you why we are where we are.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councilwoman Romero Worth.
Brad, if you could just go back to that previous slide. I just want to be clear that when you're talking about unemployment claims in Santa Fe County, we're talking about a workforce of 76,000 countywide. We're not talking about the city's workforce. And
Correct.
We're talking about a bigger universe.
This is the county. Yes, correct.
Thank you.
I don't get to pick the data sets this, TRD does, or Workforce Solutions. So we actually, the city looked, staff, we looked at 3 different scenarios, much like the world did. A V, this is like make-believe, it's going to go down, come right back, by September, we're all back to normal. We don't think there's that much validity in that assumption or that model. The W, which would be, we had our first wave and a second wave comes through and forces a similar shutdown this fall, winter, spring next year. And then the swoosh. We've really sort of determined and settled on the swoosh as our model, which is a substantial down and then slow but steady recovery for the next couple of years back to where we were. So our number one assumption is that the economy really does sort of bottom here in April. It bottomed in April. In May, we saw the governor opening up access, businesses, capacity was expanded. We expect that slow, gradual expansion of capacity to continue, which supports the swoosh. They're probably not going to get Indian market. They're not going to reopen it, or Spanish market, or any of the other things. We will see some pickup in activity, but it's not going to get back to where 2020 was. Well, the first part of it. Things that we think that will keep us in that reason is social distancing, capacity limitations, and will restrain the economy. And I think, some of these statistics are really important here to share. And these I got from the state tax and rev department in their RP80 statistical. Yeah, it's not the best data out there. It's good data, it's voluntary data, but it's from all taxpayers filing with TRD gross receipts tax. And I'm focusing on taxable gross receipts because gross receipts don't matter. Taxable ones do. And in taxable gross receipts, retail trade is 27% of our economy. Accommodations and food service is 15% of our economy. And that's the critical one. 15% of our taxable gross receipts, that's all of our businesses, how much money they generate is accommodation and food service. Construction is 13.5%. Professional, scientific, and technical is 9%. And other services, non-governmental, is 9%. Those 5 business sectors make up 75% of Santa Fe's taxable gross receipt economy. So, we are looking at a broad section of the state's, of our economy, Santa Fe, and this is the city of Santa Fe. This isn't county, this is city data, thanks to TRD. So why are we really focused on, hotel and accommodations and food service? Because it's a quarter of our economy. And why is capacity limitation? And these matter, these statistics matter. That's how we got to our $100 million deficit and shortfall, or not shortfall, but decline in revenue. It's because we are so reliant on these various sectors. The other thing a lot of people in the state aren't looking at or considering are oil prices. Oil prices make up a huge portion of the state's ability to spend money. Now, I might be a little bit sensitive to this because I spent 30 years in Alaska and know exactly how oil prices affect government spending, but it's a dramatic player on the on Santa Fe and the state government, construction, capital, but also employee and benefits and everything else. And so when you think about it, you know, that may not be a now thing, but that is definitely a next spring thing unless they open up the Permian again. And I don't think that's going to happen. You know, the positive impacts are LANL and its continued expansion and its impact on our construction sector. I bring this up because construction's 13.5% of the Santa Fe economy. The other one, film industry, has a great potential, and thankfully the city is in the driver's seat with Midtown Campus. That's 9% of our economy, and that hopefully will be a growth. Not only does it benefit professional, technical, and scientific, because that's where they're classified, but they're going to be a huge positive driver in accommodation and food service, because all those people coming here are going to have to stay somewhere and eat somewhere. And so the film industry is a twofer, in my opinion. So that's how we got to the shortfall of 99.8 million. You know, when restaurants aren't open, they're not paying water, wastewater, or environmental service fees. You know, they don't have the stuff. They're not doing it. It's a huge driver on our economy. And it's important that we keep reiterating it affects every other sector of our economy, like our utilities. As you can see, the general fund down 31.5, mostly by GRT. And so simply, these are our revenue assumptions that got us to the 100 million. We expect GRT collections to be down 33%, a loss of $37.4 million for the city, all funds. Lodgers tax will be down 50%. Again, it has to do with capacity, timing, and a lot of public, you know, desire to travel. And as Mary said, adjustments, you know, we are measuring these data points every way we can.
Councilwoman Rael.
Excuse me,
Mr.
Chairman?
Chair, Brad, can you elaborate more about or say more about how you arrived at the numbers? Because some of them cross over, right? They're connected to each other. But can you tell us a little bit more about the number breakdown?
So we had a meeting here 2 Fridays ago, I think. And Mary, myself, Clayton, the Treasury Officer, Alexis Latero, our Budget Officer, the 4 of us sat down and I came up with preliminary numbers. But you got to understand, you know, Alexis Latero's got, you know, 18, 19, 20 years with the state in various departments as a ASD and other finance positions. And Mary's got great experience at Boston, but also in the state. And Clayton's got 30, 40 years of experience in state, California, and New Mexico. And my background, I've been, you know, in the finance business for 35 plus years. And we sat down and really looked at every 781 revenue line items the city has. And we thought about what industry drives that line item of revenue. How is that done? What is the timing of that revenue? What causes us to get that revenue? What has to occur out there? And when you drive through Santa Fe and you don't see any of that happening, it affects your revenue projections. And so we sat down really for 4 hours and discussed every line item, you know, and we followed every rabbit hole we could think of. You know, what if this, and came to a group consensus that these numbers are as intricated, you know, like when you think of the tourist dollar that comes in, who does that impact? You know, Uber, restaurants, hotels, you know, 27% of retail trade of taxable. That doesn't include food. So we've eliminated all of the grocery stores and everything else. So that's household improvements, men's and women's clothing. I mean, we went into the weeds and tried to really think about what drives this revenue stream to the city and what is an appropriate, based on what we know at this point in time, everything closed. What kind of revenue are we going to have? When do you think they're going to open? We assumed parking, yay! We started parking fees again today on street, but at least it's a new revenue stream. We didn't budget for that until the end of the new fiscal, or until the fiscal year.
So Councilwoman Villarreal, is your question being answered, or do you have a specific question?
Well, it was more around, because it doesn't go into like a more minutia, I guess, but all of these make sense. I just was trying to figure out how we come up with the loss amount.
What we did is I shared with you the percent. That's what we concluded, that if you take the FY20 budget as of 12/31/19, so we had made all the budget adjustments in revenue, what percent of that do we expect it to be? So in GRT, we expect the revenue to be 67% and the loss to be 33%. And so of the 112.7 million that was the FY20 budget, what is the loss? 33% is 37.4 million.
Councilwoman Villarreal.
I'm slow on the mute button. That helps to like break it down that way. So you see the amount next to the loss. Yeah, I mean, the way you just described that one line item is great. So keep going if you can.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
that's really I had for this slide.
Okay, hang on, Councilwoman Romero Worth has questions, and then so do I on this slide. Go ahead, Council Romero Worth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Recreation revenue, can you talk about that a little bit? Like what's in there? You know, of course, the golf course is open sometimes. I'm just kind of curious, like what's in that bucket and how you decided on that percentage decrease.
So we went into, recently, I went into all of the recreational facilities, Fort Marcy, Sal P, GCC, Bicentennial Pool, MRC Golf Course, Fields, and then I also broke out the ice rink from GCC. And so in recreational revenue, those are all the entities, facilities that generate revenues. This is really based on openness. And will we open it? And when do we open it? And when we do open it, at what capacity do we open it? So if we don't open all of them until December, you know, and we just don't do it for half a year, that's 50% cut automatically. I mean, I don't have to think about that one.
Yeah, but Brad,
I think At
But
this,
the question I think is, what assumptions did you make? Like did you assume GCC would be open and nobody else would be open? Did you decide, that all of our recreational facilities would be open at some capacity? Like, how did you come to that number? Or that the golf course will be open, X number of days? I mean, realizing that we have some other issues with the golf course. I don't know, I'm just curious. I'm dialing in on that number. How did you get it?
Right. Well, so the first assumption is nothing would open until the second quarter of 2021, fiscal year 21. And then the next thing is we would open up 50% capacity, and that we probably wouldn't open to 100% capacity anytime during FY21 at any facility. We didn't really even think about individual facilities at this time. It was just, when would we open anything?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. So I'm just going back to a previous slide. So if you're assuming nothing would open till the beginning of the second quarter of the fiscal year, what date is that?
October 1st.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, Brad, the questions I have is, so if let's take it, lodgers tax collections. So if we think they're going to be down 50%, a loss of 6.4 million, the bulk of that, if not all of it, goes to fund the budget for tourism. So do we reduce tourism's budget by 50%? And the same would go then with utility revenue. If we're projecting a 25% loss, do we reduce their budget 25%? Or in their case, they have a lot of cash reserves, fund balance, so we plug some of that with their reserves. Parking, if it goes down 55%, do we reduce them 55%? Because if you look at their budget, it's around 7 million, and parking fees generate about 6 million, more or less.
Mr. Chair, I'll take the general answer to that, and then Brad can fill in some details about lodgers, what lodgers funds and utility revenue. So you hit the nail on the head. This is I think the term we used is a scalpel, not an axe, because
Right.
each of the different funds has its unique revenue source into it. We cannot treat all 70 funds the same. So for lodgers or utilities, it's not just the revenue that they have coming into the fund, but it's also the level of cash reserves that we have on hand starting out FY21 in July. So that's really going to be the mix of how we solve this revenue shortfall going into the future. Brad, can you answer the chairman's question about lodgers tax and what it funds and what the corresponding expenditure plan is?
Yes, Mary. Chairman, on the lodgers tax, so lodgers tax, it's broken up into 7 increments of 1% each. The first 2 increments are for debt service. I just calculated for Randy this afternoon, and he has like $3.2 million of debt service due next year. And so the first 2 increments of lodgers tax is going to go to that. I do not know, and I'll have to get back to you on this, is to know if those 2 increments, given our estimate, are sufficient to cover that debt service. That I do need to mark that down, because that's an important question I need to answer. The remaining portion of the other 5 increments of lodgers tax go to fund both the tourism, conventions and centers, visitor center, tourism Santa Fe, and then the arts and culture department at 1%. And at this time, we have reduced those budgets to their revenue levels.
Okay, and does that include employees?
That is correct.
Okay, so getting back to,
Landy's proposed a budget.
okay, so getting back to what Mary said a few seconds ago was, this is again the scalpel approach. Instead of saying, okay, we're expecting the budget to be down 40%, so we want all departments to take out 40%. No, we're not gonna do that. Certain departments are gonna take a certain percentage based on their revenue source.
Correct. And the thing is too, is also like in utilities, as Mary had mentioned, that they have substantial fund balance.
Right.
And
So
so,
they might not be cut as bad as, say, another department that's general fund or gross receipts tax dependent, like
correct.
100%. Okay, does anybody on the committee have a concern or issue or want more information regarding that?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I guess I'd be
Councilwoman.
curious, I mean, what does that mean to level of service? Across the different budget departments? Even
Mr.
if it's
Chair,
a scalp-
Councilor
even if it's a
Romero
scalpel-
Worth.
Yeah, even if it's a scalpo approach.
Right. Mr. Chair, Councilor Romero Worth, that's what we plan on reviewing with you in the second half of the presentation. We wanted to answer any of your questions regarding the $100 million revenue decrease. What are the assumptions, the different sectors of the economy, how dependent we are on tourism, and then roll forward into what we will be discussing over the course of the next 2 months, which is what that means for service levels. Exactly, you hit the nail on the head. I think we use that exact terminology in our presentation. So if you'll
Okay.
indulge us, we'll continue with the revenue and then we'll get to the expenditure conversation in a little bit.
Okay, anything else from the committee on this slide? Okay, go ahead, Mary.
So in this slide, we're giving a historical perspective of the city, and we want to include the Great Recession. As you can see that the Great Recession caused a decline of GRT revenue of 13.9 million over 2 years. And we're in this, and it took, 6 years, 7 years to get back to where we were in FY 2008. It shows you there are FY 20 revised budget and then the FY 21 revised budget. Just to give you the scale of magnitude that we expect in GRT declines. And this is why we are so, why the $100 million and this is a dramatic decline, unprecedented in Santa Fe's history. In this slide, what we're looking at is all funds. This is total city, where we budgeted for FY 20, $338 million. And for FY 21, we are expecting, I don't have the number, but it's like, under 250 million. So you're looking about a third decline in our revenue sources. And it's widespread. The important thing is, a lot of this is in utilities, services, it's citywide. Our recreational department, I want to go into fees, so GRT is pretty obvious. We all know what that one is. Lodger's tax, really no question. Let's see, great. Other taxes, property taxes would be in other taxes. Franchise fees are also in other taxes. And franchise fees, that's a significant number, 1.9 million, I believe. And that's for water, PNM, and other cable TV as examples. Other fees were in the gold, orange whatever color that is. Parking, transit, tourism, utilities, police, parks and rec. You know, that's what makes up fees and fines. Municipal courts, police, you know, and then other revenue. For the general fund, as you can see, that it's all about GRT. In this case, also other taxes are franchise fees and property tax. Fees and fines, and then miscellaneous revenue. So in our question, you know, it's really about GRT. And that's why we spend so much time really learning the city's economy, studying the RP 500, studying the RP 80. You know, the finance staff, you know, Clayton, Alexis, Mary, myself, you know, we all became economists overnight and did an amazing amount of research and analysis and really tried to understand what drives Santa Fe's economy.
And also, I think what I'm very appreciative of, Mr. Chairman and councilors, is the collaboration that we've had with the state economists as well. We've learned a tremendous amount from true experts in their field. And Brad reminded me this morning that, you know, every time that we met with them, they had a different revision, they had a different piece of information that they were sharing with us. So we found that process to be extremely useful and helpful, as they were also able to engage in the dialogue and confirm our understanding of the economy and our revenue estimates. So as we move forward, you know, we will continue. This is a transitional phase as we move forward over the next 12 months, continuously revising these revenue forecasts. If we end up opening up earlier than the first quarter, we'll have a revised recreation estimate, and, you know, so on and so forth, as we see the data coming in each month on our cash receipts. So if we move forward to the next slide, we are starting to move into the analysis of our expenditures. Really, what slide 11 shows is our policy objectives. And we can add on to this as well, but this is a starting point. Our public policy and our fiscal policy objectives as we move forward into building our FY21 expenditure budget. On the public policy side, we really do have to understand what is legally required, what is in the best interest of our public health and safety. We really do want to maximize the safe conditions as we all start to engage in the reopening, because we understand if we do the reopening well, that then our economy will also see the benefit from reopening. So that includes wearing masks, you know, being able to continue to engage in physical distancing, social distancing. Also very important as one of our values is equity. How do each of the decisions that we make in the investments in the FY21 budget reflect our values of equity across the city, across the services? And of course, maintaining our services. We talked briefly about service levels, which we'll talk much more in depth about in the coming months, and maintaining the jobs levels. And on the side of fiscal policy, of course, our financial stability, pricing strategy, minimizing the subsidies. Brad briefly alluded to the analysis that he's done about each one of our rec centers and the cost to maintain those recreation centers and the price, you know, per visit as well. He's been able to go into that level of detail. So we look forward to sharing that with you in the coming weeks as well. But really understanding how much of a subsidy that we provide to each of the services that we are providing from the general fund or from other funding sources. Really maximizing employment opportunities. We saw those devastating unemployment numbers earlier on in the presentation, and we understand that employment, and as we're able to support employment through our community, through a focus on the recovery, as we are able to see businesses opening 25% capacity, 50% capacity, they're going to bring back the jobs that have already been lost in our community. And really focusing on reductions that minimize the impact to our services and to our jobs, as well as our credit rating, which really plays into the cost of our capital projects going forward. If we can move on to the next slide, this is really where we start to get into some of the different options that we have moving forward that impact the organization across the board. So the way we've structured the next section of the presentation, we're walking you through different steps on how to solve the $100 million revenue decline. So step one has to do with our vacant positions and the hiring freeze for our vacant positions, where step two and discretionary spending and the costs associated with that. Step two goes a bit further. It's the next layer that we would add on reductions in salaries and benefits, such as a pay reduction, and then reduction in service levels would be that final layer that we would discuss. So all in, without having any cost estimates at this point associated with reduction in service levels, the first two steps garner us between 26 and 35 million in savings. Again, a far cry from the 100 million that is our. So Brad, next slide, we'll just go into a bit of detail on step one, and then I'll pause for questions. So again, we have more than 200 vacant positions currently. And so the estimate of savings for a hiring freeze for those 200 vacant positions is anywhere between 17 and 19 million. So those 200, a little over 200 vacant positions span from public utilities, public works, public safety, I mean, all departments. So this is a large portion of savings. Discretionary spending, these are things, examples given here: travel, registration for conferences, office supplies. This can garner anywhere between 3 to 5 million. Things we know we are not going to be engaging in over the next year. We know that travel will be significantly reduced. We know that during a cutback, office supplies. I think I've used the example of pens before. We're going to be buying less pens, especially now as we're working remotely. In our office, we've noticed a drastic reduction in the amount of paper that we are purchasing, basic supplies that it takes to run the day-to-day operations. And again, this garners about 20 to 24 million. So I'll pause at this time.
Okay, Councilwoman Romero Worth and then Councilwoman Villarreal.
So Mary, what accounts for the discrepancy, or not discrepancy, the range between 17 million and 19 million? Like what are you factoring in to get from one to the other? And then sort of relatedly, those 200 vacant positions, the royal you have determined that those are 200 vacant positions that we don't need, that, to do the kinds of things that you were talking about on the previous slide in terms of being safe and some of the policy objectives.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Romero Worth, the majority of these positions are non-public health and safety related, quote unquote essential positions. So that's really why the range. If we decide to hire in for some of those vacant police officer positions or firefighter positions, that will reduce the amount down from the 19 million. And that's really why, we wanted to give you the range, because we haven't gone into that level of detail at this point to say these 5 positions you can fill, or these 10 positions we will not allow you to fill for the remainder of the fiscal year.
Anything else, Councilwoman Romero Worth?
Sorry, was not unmuted. And so it's predominantly public safety that accounts for the range, 17 to 19?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Romero Worth, public health and safety, if we could give it that broad of a definition, but this would be operations of water, wastewater, transit, some basic public health and safety services.
So I would just, if that's true, Mr. Chair, I think we need to know exactly what those things are that account for the difference in the range, so that if we're making a policy decision, we need to know, we needed to decide whether those are critical or not.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Romero Worth, we can get you that data. Absolutely.
Okay, so on that point, I think what I'm hearing is you think you can pull out certain positions that could be, we may have to fill over the next 12 months for those purposes, and you'll tell us how many of those positions and what it would cost.
Mr. Chairman, yes, that is correct.
Okay, anything else, Councilwoman Romero Worth? Okay, Council.
All good, Mr. Chair, sorry.
Okay, Councilwoman Villarreal.
On that same point, it would for me, it would be helpful to, out of those vacant positions, to actually list, if we're not going to go into the detail of the actual position, it would help to know what positions within each department. Because I wanted to see that for this fiscal year deficit, just to kind of see how we broke it down. I haven't seen that yet. It will just help us understand which departments are most affected, I guess, even though there's kind of nuances with that, but I think it would be helpful. Thank you.
So Councilwoman Villarreal, the list of 200 vacant positions and where they are in each department.
Yes,
Okay. Okay, anything else, Councilwoman Villarreal?
that's all for now. Thanks.
Okay, Councilwoman Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. So with that list, we might as well go ahead and put a dollar figure on those positions, as well as a total dollar figure, which would include the benefits package, because as I just look at that with 17 to 19 million, I don't know how many more than 200 vacant positions we have, but I'm coming up with a number on that of somewhere between $80,000 and $85,000 per position. So let's not just look at positions. Let's also put a dollar figure to them also, because I think we need to look at every bit of data we possibly can when it comes to cost.
That was my assumption. Sorry, I didn't clarify, but yes, with the amount, with the position. Thanks.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman, councilors, we can do that. Absolutely.
Okay, Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had the same question about benefits, so that's been answered. Thank you.
Okay, so I think so it sounds like, Mary, this would, like you said, this is the first step. I don't know that any of us are raising objections to it, but what we would like to see, though, the impact, what departments, how many positions in what departments, what positions. But I would think that this is something that how do we implement something like this? Is there a resolution that gets passed by the governing body, or is that just something the mayor implements after we get all the data and we feel satisfied, or how do we actually implement the hiring freeze after July 1st?
Mr. Chair, councilors, I can speak to the financial end of that, and then I'll ask either Aaron or Jarrell to add in. So on the financial side, these would be unfunded positions. So if the department has 200 positions and they have 10 vacant positions that we will maintain vacant for the entire year, that million or so associated with those 10 vacant positions would not be included in their budget. And there would have to be an agreement that with the department directors that they would not seek to request an advertisement for these positions or fill these positions at all during the 12 months of the fiscal year.
Okay, so that's a good, so what you're saying is you approve a budget and their salary and benefit line item is a lot less. So it's kind of done. I mean, if they don't have the budget, they don't have the budget to fill the positions. That's,
I think that's right. As between vacancies, so there will be natural attrition as well during the course of the next year. So I think.
Mr. Chairman, I cannot hear Ms. McSherry at all.
It sounds like a robot voice.
A lot of interference.
Unfortunately, I have very little control over that. My computer starts and stops. Is it still bad?
yes, yeah.
Try muting and unmuting, Aaron, just to see if that works.
Again. No. Earlier it started and it stopped, so I don't know. We'll see.
Okay, so then once we approve their budget though, their budget is pretty much set and we'd have to amend it as we move forward to give them the additional funding throughout the year to hire additional FTEs in their departments. Right,
Mr.
Mary?
Chair, yes, that is correct. And
Okay,
I believe I caught the first portion of Aaron's comments earlier, is there will be a natural attrition, right? And I wanted, to make sure that you all captured at least that portion of her comment, that folks are going to retire. Folks are going to leave the workforce. Folks are going to take other jobs elsewhere or be promoted within the organization. So that is that natural attrition we can expect given the operations of such a large organization.
right, but on that point, if somebody leaves in November, we're gonna allow them to refill that position or use that position maybe to fill another position, right? Potentially, because that's still within their budget that we approved at the end of July.
Yes, absolutely. So that's the flexibility that we can expect to see throughout the year. Either they can fill that position that it was recently vacated, or another position that may be considered critical, mission critical or essential, such as a public health or safety position.
Right, and we're not assuming that we're gonna have a certain percentage of vacancies that, in the new budget year as part of this 200 vacant position we're saying now. We're saying this is gonna be your budget and that's it. Anything that happens within your existing budget, that's fine. But I just wanna make it clear, we're not assuming here we're not taking the attrition into consideration when we say 200 vacant positions. That's what we have right now, and that's what we want to stay with.
Mr. Chairman, yes, that is correct. And again, we can allow for that flexibility within the same funding source, within the
Right.
same department and within the same fund. If there is a position that opens up in, if we need to fill a mission critical position in police, we can't necessarily pull from the utilities fund to fund that off the top. So really the funding structure, those 70 funds are really gonna govern how we proceed with building the FY21 budget and monitoring that budget.
Okay, Councilwoman Romero Worth, you have your hand back up.
So I guess my question is, so Mary, you're saying we just don't fund these positions, and these particular positions are vacant, but that doesn't necessarily mean whether we need them or we don't need them. And I guess, how do we go about analyzing and figuring out, maybe there are positions that we don't need and that we should not just be not funding, but getting rid of? And how do we go about that analysis and allowing for that? Because I mean, just because they're vacant doesn't mean they're not mission critical in some way. It just happens to be that at this snapshot in time, we just didn't have anybody there, and now we don't have any money to hire. So like, I don't know, how do we figure out what we need and what we don't need as we contract?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Romero Worth, once again, I'll give it an initial shot. And if either the city attorney or the city manager want to jump in and add in, if I leave anything out. At this, you're absolutely right. This is a snapshot in time. As we move forward to talk about the service levels that we are providing to the community, that will be that accordion. As we expand or contract, we're going to be able to provide either additional services or fewer services. And so that will really govern our analysis as we move forward and a position becomes vacant. Do we fill that position, or do we fill that same position, or do we fill that, or do we reclassify the position into another position that is more of need at that particular time?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Romero Worth, I would echo everything that Mary said, and I think the piece which we'll get to further in the slide deck that can't be, that needs to be underscored is the service levels, because they go hand in hand. So we can maintain, you know, we're putting this out there, the 200 vacancies. You're right, they are a snapshot in time. They may or may not be in the right place. There's the second component to it. And I'm just wanting to say what Aaron was looking for is, you know, we will need to maintain some flexibility about which positions stay vacant and which don't. And that we'll continue to iterate as we go. But with vacancies, with any future pieces, I think we just need to keep in mind the service delivery, service implications.
Yeah, because I mean, it seems to me too, I mean, we may have positions that are occupied right now that we decide in this new environment we can't do anymore. And so as brutal as that is, I don't know how we figure out what that give and take is.
Right, and I think there's a difference between a hiring freeze and just eliminating the positions. And it sounds more to me like once a budget is approved, those positions have been eliminated if we didn't give them budget. Because like a hiring freeze is, we have between now and the end of June, there's a hiring freeze. Those positions were budgeted 10 months ago. 1 or 2 became vacant, and we're not going to fill it for the remainder of the fiscal year. That's different. That's a hiring freeze. But what I'm hearing is there may be 150 or 175 positions that don't get funded. So to me, like I said, that's not a hiring freeze. That's we didn't fund those positions, so they're gone. Am I right or am I wrong, Mary? What's your thoughts on that?
I think that's, yes, that's accurate. So as we move forward, if we are able to allocate, just as an example, an additional $2 million in funding, we're going to need to be able to understand which services or programs to restore in the future as revenue returns, as the economy continues to expand, as travel picks up, and as tourists or businesses start to expand, or as tourism starts to pick up. So really that's the nuance of what we're going to be going forward and discussing in the next few slides about the service levels. What is the service level that we're going to start the year out with? And then what are those priorities? We talked about some of the policy priorities in one of the previous slides. How will those policy priorities govern if we have an extra $1 million or $2 million? What services are restored first? So right. I think there is a nuance between a hiring freeze and then the service level approach that we are taking.
Right, and I think that's where Councilwoman Villarreal's point about the departments and the positions in the departments, because they could potentially be gone after the fiscal year. But that's where we got to talk about service level and all of that also. Councilwoman Cassett Sanchez, you had your hand up. Did you want to add anything or ask any questions?
Yeah, you know, I think it'll probably get answered in service level, but I guess that is a question in terms of, you know, the difference if we are going to expand and if we have unfunded a position versus eliminated, which I think is exactly what we're talking about, and which let's go to the service level piece, and I'm guessing that that'll be covered there.
Okay, and then before we move on, I just want to make a comment or add this. When you look at and this is just for information at this point, and I know there's a lot to still be discussed, but when you look at the city of Rio Rancho, they have 719 employees. We have about almost twice that. We have 1,400 more or less. So, and in their budget, they have a chart that shows per 1,000 residents, we have 7.2 employees per 1,000 residents. And when you look at us, the city of Santa Fe, and our population, we have 15, almost 16 employees per 1,000 people. Now there again, we probably offer a lot more services. We, there's departments and divisions we have that they don't, but still it is, there is something to that, especially if we're talking about potentially eliminating certain positions or services. They seem to be able to, do with a lot less employees than we're able to right now. And it'd be interesting to see what the ratio is per 1,000 people with Las Cruces and maybe even Albuquerque, just so that we can see, are we in the ball field? Maybe we're closer to Las Cruces in the number of employees, or are we really an outlier when it comes to this? And what does that mean?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I think if we want to do a fair comparison, I think we probably need to look at similar sized cities that provide similar kinds of services.
Like tourism and airport, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't know. Yeah. I think there's probably a lot of room for nuance in that, but I don't think, I think, looking at that is definitely something we should do. Just think we have to decide which are fair comparisons.
I agree, but like I said, when you look at double the amount though, that's kind of up there. And then to Councillor Lindell's point earlier, when you do the math that she did real quick, we're spending an average of $80,000 a year per employee that we have. What do other comparable cities spend on their employees? Okay, go ahead, Mary, sorry.
Okay, thank you. On the next slide, we go into the next layer, the next step. This really shows us what we started to discuss a few months ago with the FY20 budget shortfall. Here we have a series of different options. We're talking about a continued pay decrease. This could happen in two ways. We could work the same number of hours, the 40 hours a week generally is the work schedule, and then take an actual decrease in pay. Or as we have implemented currently, there's a furlough. So yes, but 4 hours less of work equates to a 10% pay cut. I just wanted to mention that this could take different shapes. So what we've done here is using our over 1,300 employees, we've mapped out, so these are filled positions. We've mapped out how much it would cost, what the savings would be for various different options. For option 1 and option 2, this is a scaled approach. There are pros and there are cons to each one of these different options. With this scaled approach, we see that those that are making more take a larger percentage cut, pay reduction, and those that are making less make see either no salary impact, no salary reduction, or a minimum salary reduction. So option 1, if you can recall from a few weeks ago when we were discussing the furlough plan, Councillor Vigil Koppler presented this option at that time. So we were able to cost out how much that would save and how many employees were impacted. So for 90,000 and above, the proposal that she put forward was a 30% pay cut. Between 50 and 90,000, it would be a 20% reduction. And again, whether it's through furloughs or through a flat out reduction in salary, there's many options there. From 35 to 50,000 would be a 10%, equate to a 10% pay reduction, impacting about 380 employees. And this scenario, anyone under 35,000 would not be impacted at all. So you can see the total impact of the 4 scenarios. This garners on an annualized basis the most savings.
Okay.
So
Okay, so Mary, I was just gonna comment. I've only had time to take a look at option 1, and I plan on maybe doing the same with 2, 3, and 4. But my concern with option 1 is that's a big drop between 30% and 20%. And so if you just take employees that make 90,000, and I think looking at our Sunshine portal, there's like 5 or 6 that are right at 90, maybe 91,000, and you deduct them 30%, and you have employees that make between 85 and 89, and you only deduct them 20, you're going to create a situation where the 90,000 a year employees have been taken down to 63,000, but the 85,000 a year employees are only taken down to 68,000. So you've not only created compaction, you've reversed it. Now you've got, and in our case, because again, I was using the salaries that are on our website, you have 4 fire battalion chiefs who are right at between 90 and 91,000. They would be taken down to 63. And all of a sudden, like I said, you have this group of employees between 85, 90, or 80, whatever the number is. They could potentially then be making less than 30 or 40 employees because they were hit harder. So I understand, and I don't know how that works if you run into the same problem between the 50,000 and the 49,000, because it's another 10%. So I understand the concept, I get it, but I think it's very problematic because you're going to create that problem with that, at those boundaries. So I don't know if maybe you do 30 to 35 or 30 to 25 and then 25, 15, and there's more steps, or if it's just cleaner, step 4, you just do the 20% decrease for directors and then 15 for everybody else. And then the other comment I have is when it comes to furloughs versus pay cuts, myself personally, I would rather be furloughed than my pay cut, because 1, it's easier to give hours back to employees than it is to give their salary back. I mean, even in good years, we've only averaged a 2% cost of living increase each year. And so if we're taking someone from the 90K down from all the way down 30%, I don't know that they'd ever recover that. I mean, we'd have to have really amazing years where we can then give all those, those 70 employees 30% of their salary back. That just doesn't seem realistic to me.
On that point, Chair,
yeah,
I think we also would run the risk of being able to recruit and retain employees with the kinds of skills we need for those types of jobs. And I haven't looked at the list that you're looking at, but I would just suggest that we pay those people, and we need to pay competitively with the market to attract the talent that we need to do those jobs.
Yeah, and so, I mean, we're just without further study, and I know we're gonna, option 4, it saves the most or close to the 10.2, and it seems like it's gonna be the easiest to implement and potentially the easier to reinstate if it's a furlough compared to a pay cut. But I think that, like I said, there's a lot more information we're gonna need. Councilwoman Cassett Sanchez, did you have your hand up, or did I miss that?
No, I didn't, but I do have a question.
And then Councilwoman Villarreal's next. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I mean, I do think that that's a very, very important point about the steps, and I would be interested to see if there is a way that those steps don't create that compaction. I'm not sure that by nature that it would, but I would be curious to hear a little bit more about that, because I do, I do get concerned about some of our employees that are at the lower end of that pay scale, and what those large furloughs do to them. So just exploring those options a little bit more. I'm also curious that of how this starts to change and how drastic of cuts we're looking at when we are talking about what those service levels are going to be. And to Councilor Romero Worth's point earlier, if we are identifying positions that we're saying right now we don't need them, how does that change what totals we're starting, sorry, he's upset. What totals we're starting to look at for the cost savings. So maybe as we start to look into that a little bit more, this will be a bit of an iterative process.
Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess when I looked at these different options, I think we'd have to kind of play with different aspects of each of them, possibly. And I'd like to explore that. I'm not sure what would be the best method of doing that. Because you gave us options, but then I see one that might fit better as a full package and maybe a piece of the other. So I have that question. And then the other question is, were any of these options what the union had proposed in terms of percentage breakdown?
Mary, or can someone answer that question?
Mr. Chair, I think maybe Aaron or Jarrell can chip in because I'm not recalling off the top of my head. We can get back, or we can look into it and get back to you.
How's
I
my
see,
audio?
Okay,
Aaron.
all right. Joanna.
You're good, Aaron.
I hear you.
Okay, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I don't think that one of these is exactly what the union proposed, but I think they had a similar idea as option one. It was something very similar to that idea. And I just wanted to just make a comment. These are, I think, are kind of rounded categories in terms of salary levels. We would have to look at the actual, where the break is in each kind of range of classification so that you don't have two people with the same job, essentially, getting that inversion that we were talking about potentially happening when you have one person. I mean, if you have a librarian who's paid $51,000 and another librarian in the same classification who's $49,000, we would need to treat those two librarians the same. So the exact numbers might be slightly different depending on what that classification range is for pay, because we would need to treat those people similarly. But I think these are demonstrative. The union may have had one more, like maybe one more category. They may have 5, but we could get that to folks, like 5 levels or something like that. But it was very similar to option one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Similar.
Go
Okay.
ahead, Villarreal.
And then the other thought I'm just trying to process, so bear with me, is like, what if we looked at how or what kind of cost savings it would have on us if we started looking at a 4-hour work week for everybody? I mean, not in a furlough sense, but like the new norm of business and trying to be more efficient about what we do in 4 days versus 5. I'm just curious. I don't know if it actually changes the funding aspect, but would want to hear more about that.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Villarreal, we can absolutely cost that out. That's equivalent of an 8-hour furlough, so a 20% pay reduction. So that is not I think I included that for directors in option 4, but that's something I can cost out across the board. We do have to keep in mind the service levels. So that's in terms of operations, and this is really what we've run into with the furloughs as well. It's in an administrative setting, it's much easier to be able to shift to a 4-day work week as opposed to an area where you're providing a direct level of service, where you need to have certain number of firefighters on an engine, or a certain number of wastewater employees that are on a particular shift at the water or wastewater plant.
Yep, understood. That makes sense. I was just curious about kind of, I guess, more administrative and what that looks like. And if other governments have done that. I found an article, I need to try to find it, but they were thinking about going down to that level. I think it was in New Zealand, possibly, but a different place, but just thinking about that. So if we are considering these options, how do we then maybe pick pieces or aspects of each of them and then try to run those scenarios? How would we go about doing that with you? Or not even just finance, but any of the other counselors that are not on finance?
Mr. Chair, Counselor, if I may at this time, this is really what we envision for the series of engagement now this week. We're presenting these options. If there's something like a 4-day work week, I'm able to take some pen to paper and cost that out with my staff. Same, that's also why Erin and Jarrell and our HR director, Bernadette Salazar, has joined us, because it's part of it is the financial aspect, but then there's the operational side that we just discussed. And then also, anything that we would be running into in our personnel rules that may make things a little bit more complicated. So we're more than willing to take any of your ideas and put some pen to paper and walk through those different mix and match scenarios at this point. And what we're looking to have as our target by the end of this process is to be able to give some across the board direction to our department directors, whether it's a 10% furlough or pay cut. So say option 3, 15% pay decrease for all directors, and then a 10% furlough or pay cut across the board for all other employees. So effectively what that does is it maintains the 4-hour furlough for the duration of FY21. And then it also brings up those folks that are on a 16-hour furlough now back and reduces it back to a 4-hour furlough. So there are going to be some differences in operations. But as a result of this, this process and seeking your advice and your direction, we'll really be able to provide more concrete numbers as we start to chip away at that 100 million and more concrete direction to our directors as they're putting together their budget, to our employees, so they have some level of certainty of what the situation will be in their own operation going forward in FY21.
Yes, that makes sense. And I actually would suggest just sharing this with the unions, just not saying that it's not necessarily set in stone, but these are ideas, and getting some input about what their thoughts are. And if they have another kind of scenario that they would want to share with us, that would be helpful too at this juncture, so that we're not at the end going, wait, I didn't see it. Or some of us saying, wait, I didn't see options. So thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. And Mary, again, I guess I'm advocating for the furlough as opposed to a pay cut, because I don't see these employees getting, once we take money out of their salary, I don't see it getting back to that level for years and years, if ever. And again, at least with hours, it's easier to add hours. You can go from a 30-hour work week up to a 34, and then to a 36, and then a 40. Really easy, as opposed to, okay, now let's give them 2% more to their salary, or let's give them, so I really think that's much easier, but I could be wrong. It'd be interesting to hear what the other counselors think. And then I think we also need to look at it, and there's another plus of doing furlough as opposed to pay cut. Some departments, their hours are going to be different than others, like especially recreation. They work evenings, they work weekends. Other departments are strictly Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And so I think as we continue to explore and get this information, I think we need to know, I'd like to see what the pros and cons are of furlough versus pay cut, and which gives us more flexibility. Again, I have my position, but that's just mine. I'd like to see what the staff thinks and the other counselors. Erin, you have your hand up.
Yeah, Councilor Beta, Chairman of Beta, members, there's a few advantages, disadvantages to think about, and I think we're working our way through how to deal with some of those while we're on a furlough right now too. For FALSA, for Fair Labor Standards Act exempt employees, I think everyone likes the furlough option better in terms of management and the benefit to the employee. For FALSA exempt folks who are on more of like an annual salary, it gets complicated for some categories. So we're looking at how this emergency situation plus a furlough affect those folks, because what we don't want is to inadvertently end up changing FALSA exempt employees into FALSA covered employees, which is a potential risk and under normal circumstances at least. there's certain carve outs from that risk, like actually attorneys are specifically exempt from. I cannot suddenly become FALSA covered. Neither can a physician. But there are other types of manager positions that under at least normal circumstances could. So I'm working a little bit on how this emergency situation affects that and whether or not we would be in that situation for the extent of this budgetary period as well. So that's what we don't want is people who would normally not get time and a half if they were to have to work more than their hours to suddenly be eligible for that, particularly if we might
Right.
need them because they have that type of position. That would be the potential disadvantage for furloughs across the board. But
Right.
We're working through some of the details on that class of employees because it's not everybody that disadvantage would apply to. Only the FALSA exempt and only potentially some subset of those FALSA exempt folks.
Okay, so so it sounds like they're probably more than likely would have to be a combination, but what we could do is the ones that are subject to what you just said, maybe get the pay cut, and the others, everyone else is furloughed because of that.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, unless we can find, and that's what I'm looking at a little bit now, is if this situation justifies some sort of deviation from that risk, that we would avoid that risk somehow.
Okay. Okay, great. Anything else from the committee so we can move on to another slide?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
counselors, if I may, just to put a perhaps more fine point on this, now is the time for feedback. We heard loud and clear, you want to see options, you want input, you want feedback. This week is our opportunity to do that. We are, as always, on sort of an accelerated and difficult timeline. So to the extent that you can, if you have additional questions or like you said, you want to see different things, now's the time. We're going, as you know, we've got finance tonight, public works, public utilities on Tuesday, and quality of life Wednesday. We are, as always, to Councilor Villarreal's point, our conversations and notifications with unions have long timelines associated with them. And so as we approach budget, we're trying to navigate all of these different competing timelines and pieces. So we are asking, hopefully very clearly, for your feedback in short order.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
who is speaking? I can't
that
see.
was manager, our city manager,
Oh, okay, thank you.
Councilor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's going to be important for us to know on charts like this. These are particularly painful decisions, and you know, a little context on this. No one did anything wrong. It's not like the city was overspending and all of a sudden we need to decrease our budget because we overspent. Along came a pandemic, and it was like turning the water faucet off in this city in terms of revenues, where tourist towns are particularly hard hit. So I think it's really important for us to know what number we're trying to get to, rather than, for me anyway, I mean, none of these look, none of these are any fun. They're all miserable choices, but what I need to know is, how miserable do I have to get? Because there's a lot of difference in these. The savings on these go from 5.9 million to 10.6. I really need some guidance with the other areas that we intend to have cutbacks in, and places that we're going to save. I need to know really, how much do we need to come up with? We want to cut as little as possible everywhere. To a previous conversation tonight, I'm not sure that I'm in agreement that places like wastewater, because they have mammoth reserves, that they aren't going to have the same cuts. You know, we may need to use some of their reserves somewhere else. That's never been the intention, but it could happen. And I'm not sure that, you know, enterprise funds don't need to take some of the same cuts that some of the other funds do. So I think before I can sign on to that philosophically, I need to see what those cuts look like in other departments and what the monies look like. This, you know, on this particular slide, yeah, my first choice is to go with the one that saves the least amount of money, but we have an absolute duty to present a balanced budget. So maybe we end up having to go with the one that saves an amount of 10.6. So, you know, this is asking me to, I don't like it. I mean, these aren't choices anybody wants to make, but I think that we need to know, all right, how much do I have to save? What's it really look like? What are the departmental cutbacks? Maybe some, you know, we've got to be realistic about this. The clock is running. We may have a smaller workforce than what we have now. Furloughs may not be the answer. We cannot pay people to not be working. We know that. So those are some bigger issues that we're going to need to address. And I know the clock's ticking on it. And I don't want to be the skunk at the picnic, but these are very, very hard choices. And I don't want to choose harder than I have to. So thank you, Chair.
Okay, and then the what you got me thinking about too, Councilor Lindell, with your comments is also at how much leeway or how much, whatever the word is, are we going to give to the administration and the mayor? Because I mean, they do the day-to-day, not us. I mean, I can say, oh, this sounds good or that sounds good. I can advocate for furloughs all day long, but I really don't. I don't know every single city department and what they need. And so I guess that's something we need to decide as a finance committee, and maybe the other chairs of the other committees will ask the same question. But, you know, we're used to the administration bringing us a budget, and we yeah, there's a little wiggle room in there, but for the most part, we voted up or down. And I just think if we're gonna have nine cooks in the kitchen, I don't know if we're gonna get there. I don't know if it's possible. So I don't know if other counselors want to weigh in on that.
Mr. Chair, this
Yes.
is Jarrell. If I may, Councilor Lindell, it's all of the things. A pay decrease is not a substitution for the hiring freeze or future reductions in service. We are looking at all of these things. It's sort of like building a layer of a cake. It's all, to your point, it's all really hard, unfathomable decisions that we're being forced with to deal with all at once. And we're trying to figure out the right way to sort of layer a cake. But it's not just salary cuts. It's not just temporary reductions in force. It's not just a hiring freeze. All of those things together still aren't getting us anywhere near our $100 million budget shortfall. So I just want to put that in, and Mary can add a few more details.
Okay. Aaron, you have your hand up, and then Councilor Cassette Sanchez, and then Councilor Villarreal.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to mention that in terms of timeline, so our current plan that we presented to the union regarding furloughs was through the end of the fiscal year. And they require a 28-day notice of a new plan, which is why we'd like, if we're going to extend the furloughs even for some period of time into the new fiscal year, we need to give them notice essentially this week to have it in place for the new fiscal year or shortly thereafter. So that's kind of a timeline thing to keep in mind, at least for continuing what we're currently doing. And then if we have more guidance, then we could go farther. Or if we have more of an idea of what we want to present, we could go farther in terms of a plan. But I think we're hoping to bring you something at least to extend what we're currently doing, or something modified of what we're currently doing next week at next week's council meeting, in order to have a vote on something that we could give notice on and have in place soon after the beginning of the fiscal year.
Okay. Councilwoman Cassett Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just, so slightly changes my comment. That information, which is good information to have. I do think it is hard to Councilor Lindell's point. I don't think any of us don't understand that it is all the things, but it is hard to make decisions about certain pieces in a vacuum, which I think is a problem that we are seeing. And now I think there's a little bit more explanation as to why this is now also coming to us in what feels like a vacuum, as opposed to in a budget where then we're voting up or down. But I do feel like that is some of the challenges that we've been experiencing. So that being said, we are right now, it sounds like we're being asked to make a decision on what our FY21 salaries, furloughs are going to look like, without really seeing, without the whole budget picture and seeing kind of what are the different pieces that we can move. And so I guess to that question, is there the option to essentially extend, I guess it could put another different furlough plan in place, or put a flexible enough plan that we can be changing it to what Mary has been saying.
Mr. Chairman, Counselor, if I may, if we can continue on through the layers of the cake, as Jarrell mentioned, the next slide is probably the most general. It talks about the different levels of service and really does a full circle back to where we started this evening with the presentation and the questions that were contained in the survey about different levels of service.
But let me have Councilwoman Villarreal ask her question before we do that.
Well, I guess when you're talking about this timeline and with the unions, are you saying you're already talking with them and showing them these possible options?
Councilor Beta, Councilor Villarreal, I think we're planning to send them this presentation. It was in the works up through today. So you guys are the first to see it, but I think we'll send it to them right after this.
Okay, so there's that aspect that I think is important. I mean, I agree with my colleagues. We are part-time counselors, and it's hard to make a decision when we are not seeing what's on the ground in each department, and even administration at the administrative level. It doesn't necessarily mean you're seeing everything that's happening on the ground and the needs that are in each department. So that's what is really challenging for me. And then I agree with my colleague, with Councilwoman Lindell, and I wrote this down as a note to ask you about, but we're looking at departments and not all of them are enterprise funds. So those that don't generate revenue, like say a library, does that not get prioritized? I guess that's a general question, not to answer it. That's what's confusing me. If you're not enterprise fund, you don't bring in some kind of revenue, does that mean you're not prioritized and you get cut? And then the other aspect is there's some city services that really contribute to the well-being of our community, and they're subsidized in every community. I mean, even if you look in New York, all their subway and transportation, all of it's highly subsidized by their city. Yet they don't cut that. They know that it's important to be able to get, employees to where they are to get, so their economy is continuing moving forward. That's what I struggle with, because it's not all in this nice little boxes. And because we have surpluses in one department. I agree with my colleague. Does that mean that they don't get affected by furloughs? Not necessarily. So how do we have time to like sort through this? I guess I'm just trying to figure out the best way of the best approach to this, given that you're giving us scenarios, but we really, like you just said, we have a week or less to decide on, or even throw out ideas. And is it even helpful? Like I could like pick little things on this chart of things I want to try, but maybe it's not, doesn't make sense, or maybe it's not helpful. So I'm struggling with this. I don't really know where to go with how we kind of make a decision as a governing body.
Councilwoman Romero Worth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of quick points. So the conversation about, the utilities having big enterprise funds or big reserves, and, could we tap those to fund other parts of city government? I mean, one of the things we're going to have to understand is, legally, whether we have restrictions on that money, which I imagine we do. And part of the reason they have big reserves is that they're required, for, again, service level, to have that reserve. So if anything happens, they can still provide the service, which is absolutely essential to the well-being of the community. So it may not, just because they have big funds, I just want the public to know that doesn't mean that we can just raid that money and, fund libraries, because that's just not how it works. We don't have that magic power, that superpower. So I just didn't want it to float out there as a possibility, because I think I have gotten at least one email that suggested something along that lines. And then, just to, not to pile on, but, we don't have, as the legislative body, the legislative appropriating body, we don't have our own finance staff. So this is where the hybrid that is the city, we are relying on the executive's finance staff. It's not like the legislature where you have, the Legislative Finance Committee, and then you have the Department of Finance and Administration for the executive, and you can, have equal talent on both sides presenting options and then coming together to marry those options. So this is going to be sort of, I mean, we are presented with an enormous challenge, and we do need to work together to figure out how this works. But there's going to be lots of nuances, I think, to Councilor Villarreal's point about how this actually works. They're not going to be in these neat boxes like this slide presents. It's going to be much more complicated than what we did the last go around with the furloughs. So I just throw all that out there for everybody's consideration. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Okay, Mary, go ahead. Continue.
Okay, on the next slide, it's very general in concept. As you can see, these are a selected, very not representative grouping of a few of the services that we currently provide. And so this is the main purpose, is just as was explained, things don't fit into neat little boxes. As we're moving forward, these into the service level conversations. We started to go there in a few slides ago. What about libraries? What about rec centers? How many, what is the service level that we provide in our economic development department, or in our trash and recycle, for trash and recycling? What is the service level, as one of the counselors brought up previously, for transportation? And how does that impact all of the different revenue sources that are coming in? And what does that allow us to do on the expenditure side? And so this slide is intentionally general to start as a starting point for the conversation, to say, based on the survey, that was a more formal process, based on the conversations that all of us have with our constituents, what are the priorities of this governing body as we move forward in the next 2 months for the entirety of FY21. And if we have an opportunity 3 months in, 6 months into the fiscal year, and we have removed a portion of the services that we are providing to our community, what is the priority to bring those services back online if we have the revenue available to do that 3 months in, 6 months in? So again, this is our opportunity to listen to the council, to the finance committee at this point about how you would like us to present the different options for the levels of service. So if we take the recreation centers, do we maintain all recreation centers open 100%? Do we start to scale back? Do we keep one recreation center open? What do any of these operations look like as we are facing a public health emergency?
Okay, Mary, on that point, Mary, let's talk about the rec centers for a second. The governor put out guidelines for youth programs, and the high schools now also have put out, the New Mexico Activities Association have put out guidelines for summer camps for high school sports. And what's right now, it's really clear that you cannot share equipment, you cannot scrimmage, there's a bunch of different rules. So my concern with opening any of the rec centers right now or within the next month is that we wouldn't be able to have kids participate or use them. And so I think that's something we need to take into consideration. And I don't think, and maybe what we do is we make the decision, or somebody, and again, maybe Aaron could chime in, whose call is it for opening the rec centers or not? Is that a governing body decision, or is that within the purview of the manager? Or I mean, that would be helpful to know, because like I said, I wouldn't be in favor of opening it at least through the month of June, any of them, if our kids in our community can't participate. So Aaron, who can open the rec centers?
Chairman Abeyta, members of the governing body. So I think at this point, there's nothing saying that we could not open them if we were able to follow the certain health guidelines that have been issued, and if we were following our own order about not allowing gatherings of more than 5 people. So obviously no organized sports or classes, but the budget will strongly dictate whether or not these facilities can open. So we have this weird period of time between now where we don't have a budget and July 1st, well, July sometime, whenever we're going to adopt a budget during July, where we don't know what that new budget looks like. Because we have a budget for this fiscal year that's been essentially blown up, and we have an unknown budget for next year. There's nothing in law that says these facilities have to operate at certain hours or certain times or to certain populations. So it's a little bit of a gray area. Right now, we can't operate them at full. I mean, we wouldn't be able to operate them fully because we've got people on furloughs for 16 hours a week. So that would certainly be reduced operations if we decided to reopen them. So it's not super clear. It's a little bit of a gray area. But in terms of financial ability, I think it's one of the areas where right now we've reduced hours for those folks. And it's one of the areas that it's not a required service going forward. So it's certainly an area where we could save in the budget.
Okay, so we're getting emails about open this, open that, this and that. So for sure, my response to my constituents could be, we're not opening anything between now and July 1st. Is that because of our budget?
I think that could be the city's position. So we have folks that have been reassigned to different jobs, right, that are on the 16-hour furlough. So at this point, it's somewhat of an operational decision. I mean, if the governing body wanted to say, this is our priority, we don't want people reassigned for those 16 hours and we want to open to the extent possible, I think that's something that could happen. But I think right now that the operational decision based on just management needs and the capabilities has been to not reopen for the time being, whatever that time period is.
Okay, and so, but that's the manager's decision then, whether to open them between now and July 1st, at least.
I think, yeah, because of all the unknowns, I think at this point, it's not so much a policy decision, it can be a management decision.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee,
Yes.
This is city manager. Just to, of course, everything that Aaron said is accurate. Part of what is complicated is if the city, if I were to make a decision that said, let's open them all, we will be presenting then the implications for our 21 budget will be very different. So it's all connected. I don't know how to, we've used layers of a cake. It's a bit of a water balloon. If we're to say, we're gonna modify the furlough plan and do this or that, it's because so much of the core functionality we're dealing with right now is our personnel costs. Everything will affect the 21 budget. So it does ultimately then come to you all in a different form. So I think that's partly why we're in uncharted territories, but partly why we're hoping again to get some feedback, direction, sense of prioritization from you all, is because ultimately each decision affects the next. And so it will come to you in some form or fashion in the 21 budget process. So that's where we are.
Okay, thank you. I see hands up. Councilwoman Romero Worth.
Okay, sorry, I'm unmuted now. Just to further complicate it too, I mean, I think we also have to ask ourselves the question of whether, from a public health and safety point of view, we want to be opening all those facilities. That's an awful lot to manage in terms of keeping the public safe and keeping those facilities at the level of cleanliness. And then, based on, you can't have the same number of people using them as we probably are used to. And so does that, is the expenditure of having that facility open worth, the fact, is that you expending that money, is that worthwhile for the amount of use that it could have, given that it's going to be a decreased use because of the COVID situation and what is required in order to keep the public safe and, virus free? So I just throw that also into the mix.
Councilwoman Cassett Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also, just as we're gathering information and as we're looking at making these decisions, we've been talking about, do we open all the rec centers? Do we open one rec center? Do we rotate opening rec centers? Mary, some information that I'd like to get is that aside from personnel, what are operating costs that go into this decision? So if we decide to only open Chavez Center and we're shuttering, South P and Fort Marcy for the foreseeable future, does that save us money as compared to opening up different facilities on different days? And same question goes to the library. So when we are making these decisions, how does not just the hours at a particular facility factor in there, but general upkeep on a facility at this moment?
Mr. Chair, Councilor, yes, we can provide that information as well.
Can I add to that?
Yes,
I
Councilwoman
mean,
Vera.
we're talking about what it costs to run each of these facilities, but also the use and how many people actually utilize in terms of the facilities each of these locations. I think that would help if we have that number.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor, absolutely. We'll get that for you.
Okay, and I see Councilwoman Cassett Sanchez, your hand went back up.
Yeah, sorry, just one thing to add. I also, I'd really be curious to look at some interesting alternative models and what some of the feasibility and the cost impact might be for that. So if we run some library services out of a rec center, what does this start to look like in terms of serviceabilities if we choose to open? How might this change those dynamics? So I'd be curious if we can potentially look at some of those pieces. And I know part of that is discussing that with Kira Choa, John Munoz, and what those look like from those perspectives. But I'd be interested in looking at some of those creative solutions that might help again, mitigate what those facility costs would be, and looking at how we can still provide some level of service that we know is not going to be the same, but still helping.
Okay, go ahead, Mary.
Okay. I appreciate Councilor Casawet Sanchez for that comment, because as we move into discussing the different levels of service, as I said in the beginning, right, it's about creativity and innovation. And how are we going to continue to provide services? It might be in a different format, in a different way. If we can use senior services as an example. The bulk of their service provision was through congregate meals at the senior centers. But when the pandemic, when we started to do social distancing, because that is an at-risk population, the senior services transformed their service delivery into a mobile operation. So they no longer provided congregate meals and then started to provide Meals on Wheels and then pickup services as well, most recently. So that is a great example of, as we move forward, that was caused by the public health emergency, but as we move forward into the budget shortfalls, the same level of creativity and the innovation that we're going to have to use to be able to continue to provide some levels of service for libraries or rec centers, but provide it in a different model. And that is really going to be the key as we move forward and present these different options. So as we continue our presentation on the next slide, we're continuing to walk through not just on the expenditure side, but on the revenue options as well. So we're going to review the very quickly revenue options for from the state, from the federal government, and then our own, what is within the city's control. So here, these 6 different items are, we've spoken with members of our delegation about our priorities going into the legislative session. Everything from support for our police officers and firefighter salaries and benefits from the state's Law Enforcement Protection Fund and Fire Protection Fund, to immediately start collecting the municipal portion of the GRT for the internet sales tax. Similarly, the state has their own reserve funds, one of them being the severance tax fund. So in order to provide us a very inexpensive loan program, we're requesting a 0 interest loan program for municipalities from the severance tax fund. In addition, I think there are certain things within the city's control for changing ordinances. There are certain state ordinances that are outside of our control. So we're requesting the state to change certain statutes to allow us to use fund balances for general municipal purposes. So we talked about that a bit before, that using utility funds or lodgers tax funds to be able to support general municipal purposes as we're going forward to bridge the $100 million gap. Similarly, there's different tax options, a differential property tax, for example, and then a more direct financial assistance as we continue to assume responsibilities directly related to the coronavirus pandemic. Expenses at our emergency homeless shelter, which has really resulted in preventing the spread of the coronavirus in our community. As we move forward to the next slide, we have our federal revenue options. There's been a resolution calling on the federal government to support us financially, and the HEROES Act identified the version that passed the House anywhere between 14 and 29 million to support the city. But that is at this point uncertain at best. The next slide really does focus on the revenue options that are within the city's control. Everything from using our cash reserves. This is a one-time source of revenue. We're going to be drawing down on our savings account, anywhere from our general fund reserves on, forward to lodgers tax or others, as we are legally able to do. Asset disposition, this is another very large category of one-time revenue. Anything from selling Midtown, to disposing of other assets, Santa Fe Estates, really looking at our portfolio and diving more into detail on that. So we're very interested to hear your feedback on any of those one-time revenue sources and the ability to use that one-time revenue to support our operations going forward. And then fines and fee increases, which are completely within our control and our authority as a governmental entity, and tax increases. I mentioned the internet sales tax, that's within the state's purview, but GRT and property tax increases are within the city's purview.
Mary, as far as asset disposition, my position would be, let's identify and move on that sooner rather than later. Even though it is just one-time revenue, we've been talking about this. There is like the Northwest Quadrant, those properties in there. There's other pieces around the city that we can take a look at. As far as tax increases, before I would consider something like a property tax increase, I would want actual polling to be done and not surveying. I would feel much more comfortable if we had questions that were developed by a professional that would say this. I mean, they know how to couch the question, right? They give you the history, they give you a little bit of what the situation is, and then they pose the question, and then we would get an answer. When I was at the county, we used to have the brand new courthouse the judicial courthouse used to fail every time we'd go out to the voters. So what we did is we invested in an actual poll, and we found out why it was failing, and then we were able to develop a strategy as to how to get the public to look favorably on it. And then ultimately we were able to pass it, but it wasn't without that piece. And so I would be really interested if we did consider something like that. And like I said, I would want to see some of that evidence before I supported something like that. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is about the fund balances that you said. If you go back to that slide about priorities for the legislature. I think it's back one more. Yeah. So change state statute. I realize that's important for some of these funds that we're talking about, but are you going to let us know what funds you're specifically going to try to adjust, or is it this blanket adjustment for state statute requirements? Does that make sense? Like there's a bunch of different funds, they have different allocations that come from, that are set by the legislature or by state statute. And so how are you going to prioritize which fund balances that we're going to tap in or try to tap into to change those statutes?
The primary one that comes to mind is the Lodgers Tax Fund. That is limited currently under state statutes. But there are balances in that fund that we could use to support general municipal purposes. So that is the main one that we've discussed with our delegation.
Great, that would be on my list. There's others that I don't want to necessarily, I think they serve a purpose for our community as it relates to like transportation that I wouldn't want to like go into, and they may not even garner that much anyway. That's very specific for transportation support. And there's probably others that I'm not thinking. I just want to make sure we know about those before we start changing state's statute. And the other question I had was, what's a differential property tax?
Mr. Chairman, councilors, I see that the mayor is on the Zoom call with us, and I think he is more of an expert in this area than I am. So I'm going to defer to him, given that he explains this better than I do.
Mayor, are you still there? Do you want to tell us what that is?
Sure. So this is an idea that has been around for some time, and that is we are all, I think, aware that many of the folks who live in Santa Fe are the beneficiaries of long-time generations of property owners, and the property taxes, they are living on the family land or in the family home, the residence that's been in the family for a long time. And we intentionally have a policy to not tax them off their land. On the other hand, we have a lot of folks for whom the home or residence they have in Santa Fe is a second or third home. It is a very expensive piece of property. It is undervalued because they're the beneficiary of the lower valuation that is designed to protect and preserve the families of Santa Fe. So the question is, could we find a way to differentiate the property tax, either level or valuation, so that we don't in any way harm local residents, but we do find a way to get more revenue from people who are enjoying Santa Fe but don't live here? And how would we go about doing that?
So that's kind of on the lines with, I'm forgetting one of them, representative's name. That's
Matt
looking at
McQueen.
this. Matt McQueen.
Yeah, Matt had a proposal for this in the last 2 sessions. There are other ways to, that he has one particular approach. I think what we would look at would be a variety of things that would garner us additional property tax from people more able to pay without penalizing those who are perhaps land rich but cash poor. And we don't want to hurt those folks.
Absolutely. Thank you for that explanation.
Happy to help. But Mary understood it perfectly well. She was just trying to make sure I was paying attention.
That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair.
And you're on
Mr.
mute.
Chair, I think you're
Matt,
on
your
mute.
turn.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm on mute. Councilwoman Romero Worth.
Am I on mute? No, I'm unmuted. Look at that. So I think some of what would be helpful on all of this is to have some sense of what either the option saves us or what it gives us. So like if you know, how much money could we pull from cash reserves? How much money do these assets add up to? Because right now, from what you've given us, I've just been trying to, I mean, we're looking at what, you know, I mean, we're not at 100 million. What are we at, Mary? I mean, 30, 50, I don't know. There's a big chunk here that's could be any of these things, right? And I guess it would be, to Councillor Lindell's point, like, what are we looking at? Like, how much do we have to pull out of salaries and benefits, realizing that that's the biggest part of the budget? But we have these other things, like what would an internet sales tax generate? What would a gross receipts tax increase generate? But also, what harm does it do? Because we already have high gross receipts tax. You know, the kind of the cost benefit, like, and yeah, differential property tax might be a great thing, but you know, that's going to take, I don't know that the legislature's ready to pass that. It's got constitutional issues, I think. And, you know, we wouldn't realize that money for quite some time. So, I mean, first you'd have to pass it, then you'd actually have to let the time go by so you collect the tax so that we could get it. So like there's, I mean, there are lots of options here, which is a good thing, but we have a crisis here right now. Where are we going to get this money?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Romero Worth, that really speaks to the complexity of the task in front of us. Even with, you mentioned the timeline around potential either property tax increase, the same timeline would apply with the GRT, right? There's going to be when the council votes on that increase and then when it's actually effective. So none of these options we're looking to seek additional revenue as of July 1st. These would be part of the layers of the cake, as to your point, that either saves us money or gives us additional money, gives us additional revenue. That being said, asset disposition as well. That is something that is very time consuming. You know, I think Aaron can speak to the timing, as many other folks on this call can, to the amount of resources and the timeline that it took for the Midtown to get us to this point for the Midtown process. And we are we're still some time away from actually seeing that disposition come to fruition. So even to be able to give you estimates would require appraisals or would require additional resources from many of our offices. So this direction that we're looking for tonight on what to prioritize and how to prioritize it, as well as kind of the options on the revenue side, as well as the service level that we are looking at, which we didn't spend too much time on, that is really what we need from the governing body to then be able to prioritize what is our next step. Do we pursue appraisals for all of these properties? To then answer your question, it's approximately 25 million, but that 25 million we couldn't bank on until 6 to 9 months from now, and what that timeline associated with that is. Aaron, do you want to, I'm sure there's something I'm missing in that very complicated process.
Mary, Councilor Beta, I think everything you said is right. It's just that it really depends on what process and what piece of land, how fast something can be realized. Like if we have a small parcel of land we just want to auction off, that would be the fastest option, but we still need an appraisal because that's required by statute. And we'd have to actually conduct the auction. But we do, I think Midtown is the longest timeline of an example for disposition of property, but that was intentional because we want to make sure we do it thoughtfully and with a partner rather than just disposing of it for the highest value. But there might be other pieces of land where that's not true. And if there are certain pieces that people are aware of and they want us to target right away, they're probably not going to be the most expensive options or the most lucrative options, because those are probably going to be more thoughtful processes that are surrounding those pieces of property.
And the timeline really, counselors, the timeline really factors into this, because if we have to make more severe service level reductions through the first portion of the fiscal year, either for public health reasons or for budgetary reasons, as we've discussed tonight, then that would really give us an idea on the expenditure side. If we do have an infusion of 5 million, 25 million, what we would then add back in to our budget, or how we would use that additional revenue if it did become available as a one-time revenue source 6 months from now, 9 months from now.
Councilwoman Casa Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So circling back to that service level conversation, I feel like when we ever have this conversation, we basically talk about rec centers and libraries, but I know that that can't be all of it. So, you know, to Councilor Beta's point, as we are city councilors, we're not in with the nitty gritty of what is happening at the department level. Where else are we discussing service level reductions? Is this part of the exercises that our staff is going through? You know, where else are we looking for you guys, for us to be giving direction and getting information?
Jarrell, do you want to start with a context on that citywide? I can speak to it from the budgetary perspective, and then I think a more general context would be helpful. So specifically on the revenue side, right, as we talked about, there are 70 different funds, and sometimes it's as easy as one revenue source going into a particular fund, and other times it's more complex where there's multiple different revenue sources going into a particular fund. So that's the approach we're taking going forward into FY21. So lodger's tax, as you saw, that's a 50% decline. As Brad mentioned earlier, there are some debt service requirements that are off the top, right? The first priority. And then as Randy and Pauline, the two departments that are funded by the Lodgers Tax Fund, are reviewing their budgets, their expenditures going forward, they're having to reduce to a larger extent than, say, the utilities funds that are seeing a $20 million decrease, and at a smaller percentage. So that's really governing as we're going forward the funding source going into a particular fund, the revenue source, and how we're expecting it to perform at a point in time. And we actually developed those revenue estimates in May, which we expect to revise again before the budget is finalized in July, because we'll have Lodgers tax updates, we'll have GRT tax updates. Now that parking will be reopening, we'll have an updated data set for our parking revenue to base our revised projections on going forward. So I know that adds a layer of complexity into it, but really that's governing the expenditures going forward through FY21, is all of the different revenue sources going into these 70 different funds gets to dictate what our expenditure levels are in FY21.
Okay, thank you, Mary. And then Jarrell, did you have more to add from the non-financial piece?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, Councilor Cassett Sanchez. I mean, part of what I think we're in a little bit of a chicken and an egg situation. So part of the frustration is what comes first. We're looking for some, it's like, where should we focus? Should we focus on, the sort of obvious rec centers and libraries? Do we want to look at, well, we pick up trash once a week. Do we want to look at trash every other week? Or is that off the table because we would never even look there? So and I appreciate the frustration, I want to just acknowledge it, is we're in a chicken and egg. So we can present something and you could say, no way, that's not good enough. Or we're trying to get a sort of feel for what elements do we want to focus on? And again, part of it, to sort of piggyback on Mary's point, we have areas where there's sort of fungibility in funds. And then with the general fund, it's personnel. And so everything is tied together. Somebody had mentioned, well, do we just have one rec facility if we close two others? Well, if we close two others, what's the logical next question? What happens to the staff? So I want to appreciate that this is a bit of a chicken and an egg. All of this comes forward, again, through the budget process, but I think that I don't have more specifics necessarily than what that is, but we are in a bit of a chicken and egg. Somebody has to sort of make some decisions or guidelines or feedback first. We were coming to you all to seek some feedback. If that's not going to work and we need to present something and come back, we can do that too. But I think that's, I don't know if that answers your question, Counselor, but that's the best I can offer in this moment.
Okay, thank you. I mean, it kind of does. Some of this may just speak to this being my first budget process and it being a not normal budget process, to say the very least. But just some of that understanding, again, it's where are the lever points? We do have these services that are legally required. Of course, rec centers and libraries are the most obvious. And so our minds do jump there. But I think for me, and maybe this is something that you and I discussed during our weekly meetings, having a discussion of what some of those options are looking like as a jump point, and also knowing, from you guys, knowing from the perspective of Mary having the expert of all the different funds and how that impacts pieces. And then of course, the general management of the city falls under the executive branch. So for me, that would be beneficial. I would, love to hear from the rest of the committee and see what they have to say. And perhaps that is something that you and I discuss offline.
Mayor, you had your hand up for a while.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is really constructive and very useful, and I think it's also, you're the beneficiaries and the victims of the first time we've tried this. And so it is a little messy. A couple things about, I think we've now reached the end of the actual PowerPoint presentation. So let me just try to recap what it was all about, almost all of it. There's one more slide. So you've been the beneficiaries of a very, very detailed briefing on how the $100 million budget deficit gets created, what the origins and basis of that deficit amount to. And then that was followed by some specific proposals or categories of proposals where we need your feedback. The ask tonight is not to build the budget, but to do what Jarrell started to describe, which is to begin to layer the decisions around guidance for a budget. So for example, we look at the question of a hiring freeze. As a general matter, as individuals and as the finance committee, how does that sit with you? Does that seem to make sense, recognizing you've asked for more details about the specific positions and the costs and perhaps some exceptions? That seems to me to be, as mayor, I would say, if we all could look at that as a proposition, a policy decision, and say, seems to make sense. Now we've just taken $17 to $19 million out of our $100 million budget deficit. We talk about some of the other item on that slide that talked about non-essential spending and reducing wherever possible things that we really know we can't afford to do, whether it's buying new vehicles or doing upgrades to facilities or materials or travel. Is that something that passes a kind of a common sense policy test? Then the next thing you get to is where we really do need some guidance. And that is, as we look at a first bite, not a final product, but the first effort to look at a way to reduce costs, there is a chance, before we even get to the questions that you all have been raising about service levels, facilities opening or closing. There's a question that Councilor or Chairman Abeyta raised about what do we do for the remainder of the summer and how do we manage our way from where we are now to the time when we have a budget that's balanced and we vote on it. How do we get from here to there? There's a requirement to get some direction. Councilor Abeyta offered some about opening or not opening rec centers for the remainder of this fiscal year. It also applies to the people who are on furloughs for the remainder beyond this fiscal year, but into the period where we still haven't adopted a fiscal year 21 budget. So some guidance to that very specific immediate need would be very useful. Another area where we're looking at guidance, and not a final decision, but some preferences, and we've heard from the chairman on his preferences, has to do with pay cuts, furloughs, and reductions in force. And we saw 4 different options. They're by no means the only options, but there are 4 different ways of looking at a first effort to make a decision, give general direction to a pay cut or furlough or a reduction in force as it relates to our department heads and all of the people who are members of the Santa Fe city government team. And if you have preferences or things you think are completely wrong-headed and won't get the job done or are inadequate, if you're eager for us to do more early and bite the bullet sooner, this would be a time not to make a decision, but to give the city manager and me and our finance team and HR team and the city attorney your thoughts. You don't have to do it tonight, but it is a matter of great urgency. After that, I think we begin then to tee up for you the kinds of choices that the budget process itself will begin to unearth and develop. There are questions about what facilities are essential and what facilities aren't, and how many we can afford. There are questions of the level of service that we can afford to provide and how we would prioritize among and between those choices. And now is the time to start thinking that through on as it relates to your own policy preferences. Mary put up a slide earlier with two kinds of policy priorities, one based on the elected officials type of priority, equity, inclusivity, a sense of things we're required to do and things that we opt to do. And then the finance department's way of looking at things, which has to do with subsidies and cost benefit ratios. So that those choices, and we heard very clearly that the governing body and members of the council are eager to have more data and more options rather than be handed an up or down vote. Now is the time to begin to prepare for a variety of kinds of presentations you'll be getting from the department heads who are doing that kind of work right now. They are working to come up with different ways of being creative, different ways of making hard choices, and bringing those to the city council and the governing body for budget hearings. At the end of the day, there will be a budget that will be presented for a vote. But what we're doing this time in an effort to produce a budget that reflects not just my priorities as mayor, but really the extraordinary circumstances we're in, we would like to produce a budget that reflects the values of the governing body in this extraordinary period of time, recognizing, as Mary said in one of the very early slides, this is an iterative process. There will be further opportunities to review it. There are a lot of unknowns. We don't know, for example, if the state were to offer us a low or no interest loan from the severance tax fund, what amount they would consider to be within the realm of possibility, and what the terms would be of a loan. We don't know whether it would be the last 10 million that it would solve or more than that. So we're going to have to try to layer our decision making, and the effort tonight was to give the Finance Committee a chance to see Mary and her team's presentation around the kinds of guidance that will make the most difference early on, without solving for everything simultaneously, but to begin to solve for those things that we do believe sooner or later we're going to have to make some decisions about. We're going to have to make decisions about a hiring freeze, a spending reduction for non-essential items, choices between pay cuts, furloughs, and layoffs. I think we can all say those are coming. Do we have your best advice to bring that together forward sooner, and then bring the rest of the budget process as the department heads and the rest of the administration can put together packages that make sense for you all. So I think that's the kind of guidance, that's the ask for tonight. It's policy guidance, it's specific choices that we could make sooner and get them out of the way and go as quickly as possible from a $100 million budget deficit to an $80 million budget deficit or a $75 million budget deficit, and then take the next bite as we look at choices for service level, staffing level, things that roll out of the budget process itself.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilwoman Romero Worth.
So I guess what I'm struggling with, and I keep trying to move the slides on the screen and realizing I can't, so I have to go over here to my computer and move the slides over here. what I'm struggling with is what I'm struggling with is how the hell we're going to do this. So all of these revenue suggestions aren't going to give us the money. We have to have a balanced budget when we submit it. When is that, Mary? July 1st? August 1st?
July 31st, Mr. Chairman, Counselor.
Okay, so, and we, so you have to submit a balanced budget right now. In order to balance the budget, we have to cut $100 million because we don't have the revenues. We have, our expenditures over revenues are short by $100 million. So we've got to cut $100 million. Or we've got to find the money now. So I can completely appreciate that, you know, maybe as revenues improve or, you know, we get new help, we're going to be able to maybe add back. But right now, I mean, like these revenue options are great, except that we're not going to be seeing this revenue in the time frame in which we need it in order to balance the budget by July 30th, 31st. And so, I mean, and I don't know, you know, I guess the other thing is, so when you go to the reduction in service levels, if we cut across the board service levels 25%, is that the right thing to do? I mean, is it the right thing to do to cut them all the same? Is it, you know, do we cut, you know, do we cut one service level more than another? I mean, there's so many factors here when you think about, you know, we're going to need to rebuild our economy because we're going to want to increase our tax revenues so that we can actually do the things the government needs to do. So you don't want to, like, you know, cut business development altogether because we may need that in order to grow the economy that we need to generate the revenues. You know, obviously we don't want to cut essential services like, you know, trash, recycling, water. So I don't know, like, I mean, and do we cut these service levels at different levels? Do we cut it across the board at a particular level? I mean, this is, and what we've been given here is not enough to have 100 million by July 31st. I mean, so I don't know what we do.
On that point, and I don't know if this is Mary or Jarrell, maybe Jarrell, the manager. Can each department, maybe you've already done this exercise, can each department cut their department by 30 or 40%, make up the close to the 100 million and still exist? And still, like, for example, is there enough in Parks and Rec where we can furlough, we can do some layoffs and still operate the three centers? Or is that not possible and we have to choose a center or two to stay open?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'll start and then Mary jump in after me. So that is the exercise that our teams are currently doing. In most cases, they've been asked to look at cutting their budgets 42%. So
Okay.
the answer to your first two, the first part 1 and 2, yes, they're looking at it. That's what they're doing. Can they exist still? Begs a different question. So that's where, again, part of this is a chicken and an egg. If you were to say, don't look at X or Y, that helps them. But part of what we're
well, but that would help us though, I think, Jarrell, if the departments came to us and said, or you come to us and say, look, we can still function as a land use department by making these cuts, or these would be the things we wouldn't be able to do anymore as a rec department, but we can still have all three.
Absolutely. And what we were trying to do, and again, we're all in uncharted territory here, right? Was if there was, that is all going to come forward in the budget process. That will happen in the hearings in July. That doesn't give us a whole lot of time. It doesn't give a whole lot of modification because we're on this crazy short budget. So what we were trying to do is front load it a little bit, get some guidance, some feedback so we know if we're trending in the right direction. The other piece to it, to the earlier point is, if we're at this crazy number that nobody quite understands, $100 million, right? So if we implement a hiring freeze, that gets us down a little bit. We add this in,
Right.
it gets us a little bit. Meanwhile, the budget exercise is coming in, they're coming in at their 42%. Not all can even get there. I mean, that's just, you guys get it.
Right.
We're sort of on the bone to begin with. So if we could take something off the top in an exercise ahead of the budget, which to Councilor Cassett Sanchez's point is frustrating because you guys don't have the whole picture, totally hear you. But if we could do some of these things that to start with, it reduces the number a little bit, then we keep moving forward.
But then that's huge. There's a big difference then between a salary cut and furlough, because then now if I cut their salaries, they're still gonna work 40 hours a week. So then maybe I'm not closing facilities. So now that's different. So in other words, a salary cut now is a big difference from a furlough.
To that point, Mr. Chair, it's almost like the service levels need to drive, you know, the budget. I mean, we need to know what we can and can't do.
Because
Right.
Chairman Abeta, because those
Yes.
proposals, some of which were gigantic for furloughs and pay cuts, only save 10% of the overall shortage.
Right, but that's Councilor Romero Wirth's point, though. What the departments need to put this together and say what they can do and do.
To Mr. Chairman, to be clear, they are. That is happening. That is what they are doing right now.
If they do that, though, do we even need to deal with furloughs and pay cuts?
Yeah, so why, it's like the cart before the horse. Why are we making us make these decisions when we may have to contract to such a degree that those furloughs we may be doing both. We may be cutting jobs and furloughing, but we don't know how much we need to contract until we know what that means for services.
Well, and we don't run the departments. We don't know what they need. They do.
I mean, to do the salary, and I keep trying to move the slide on my computer and I can't. To do the salary, you know, furlough job elimination thing. Yeah, we
have to do both. We have to do it all. Even if we did the most draconian piece, which nobody wants to do, we're only hitting $10 million.
Exactly. So why don't you do the big one first? Why don't you do the departments first? And then you come back and say, now we need a little more. And we either take it by furlough or we take it by salary reductions.
So
I think we are talking the chicken and egg. I think it's becoming a little more clear what we're. I think we need to.
Mr. Chairman, may I say it again?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
And Mary, perhaps you can correct me if I'm wrong. So we have a timeline problem, right? We have, it is June 1st. The budget hearings don't begin until the middle of July. We will have a budget at the end of July. So we have a gap. We have this time, the furlough that we was approved through the end of June. And then we have a window, we have a gap in which we will not have a 21 budget. So we have to, you're right, we're backwards. We're completely backwards. No, but this is not how you build a budget.
So extend the furloughs to the end of July. What's already
That's
there.
a vote that the governing body will have to make.
Okay, so that's.
So part of what again, trying to be respectful of feedback that has been received throughout this whole process, which again, nobody wants to be in, and as Councilor Lindell pointed out, is nobody's fault. A salary cut as listed out on page 14 was heard loud and clear that needed to be brought forward in conjunction with any additional vote around a furlough.
Okay, so the salary cut would be temporary also then? Because I think kind of, at least what I'm saying, and maybe Councilor Romero Wirth is here with me, maybe not. It's sounding like the direction we might be giving you is furlough or salary will be temporary to the end of July, but further furlough and salary reduction will be after the departments have been cut and shrunk.
Mr. Chairman, if that's the direction you had provided, that would be very helpful to us.
Well, because you guys are the experts, you know, I can't go in and tell John Munoz what kind of recreation program to run, or why is he do, I'd rather him bring me a recreation program he wants to run and then react to that and ask him questions, and he'll probably have most of the answers because he would have already looked at that when he considered cutting his budget. And then, like I said, if there's, then it's like, okay, there's still a gap, governing body, of $2 million, and we can close that gap by either pay reductions or furloughs from August 1st to January, or August 1st to the rest of the year. I think that's what's becoming clear in my mind, but let me hear from some other counselor. Counselor Romero Worth, go ahead, and then
Just on this point though, just to be clear, what we have been talking about is the FY21 budget. We have not been talking about what we're going to do between the end of these current furloughs that expire the end of this month and the beginning of the FY21 budget, August 1st. So that's a problem we haven't really been given any details on. So I don't even know if we just extend what we've been doing, does that work? Or I guess, or maybe what it does is it just feeds into that budget year.
Chairman
So we
Abeyta,
haven't
Councilor
talked
Romeroworth,
about that piece.
Councilor Abeyta, Councilor Romeroworth, if we do a stopgap, what was just described, so that would be in place for whatever that period of time is. We would need to come back. We'd still need to give 28 days notice to employees about pay decreases and furloughs or layoffs in whatever plan we choose going forward after that.
But that'll be temporary. That'll be to the end of July. And then between now and then, we work on how we develop a bigger budget.
Right. So Chairman
also-
Abeyta, I'm saying in the budget hearings, if we're able to decide on whatever that looks like for after August 1st, our budget hearings, I don't think are scheduled to be finished till the end of July. So we'll also have to budget not doing those cuts during August if we don't do them for longer than 1 month right now. So people would
Mr.
be
Chair.
coming back, going away, coming back, going away.
Councilor Abeyta, I just need to inform the committee that our FY21 budget was submitted today to DFA.
Right, and we submitted this last one as a placeholder.
Exactly. And so that placeholder is in place. We do have a budget for July, August, September in place now. It is the FY20 original budget adopted by the council. So any adjustments that we need to make between now and July 31st need to be made to that budget, not to our existing or our FY21 budget.
Right.
And Mr. Chairman, to Brad's point, this is a technical point. DFA is allowing us this flexibility as we proceed. What Jarrell mentioned was really focused on, any decisions that we make now will impact, what we do in the budget, right? That's really the stopgap measure. Anything that we do now to cue that up will have impact, to Councilor Romero Worth's point, on the 21 budget.
Okay, so can the finance committee, like this evening, just recommend an extension of the existing furlough to July 31st? What do the committee members think about that? Because I'd like to get on with the bigger picture and 21. I don't want to talk past this meeting about what we're going to do between now and July 31st.
Mr. Chairman, and to that point, why wouldn't we extend what we already have if we're not going to be opening any of the facilities? I mean, if we're just going to stay, we're going to do exactly what we're doing now next month, why wouldn't we extend?
Right.
Why wouldn't we extend what we're doing now?
There isn't time to do anything else between now and the 31st with all the information that we're going to ask for and been asking for. I'd rather spend the time between now and, we have two finance committee hearings left before we get into budget hearings. And I'd rather use those two meetings dealing with the FY21 budget and not the furlough plan or salary plan between now and July 31st. What do other members of the committee think? Councilor Cassett Sanchez, what are your thoughts?
I think this is what I've been struggling with the whole time of, I don't, again, which is the cart, which is the horse. And I think we've determined service level is which goes first, the horse? I don't know. I don't have horse and carts. Yeah, the horse pulls it. So I guess service level is the horse. And then looking at some of these other pieces, what these permanent, because there's two separate things we're talking about, which is furlough to get us from here to there.
Right.
And then what the salary cuts permanently look like, what the potential probable layoffs look like. So I think that is where we go from here to there. In terms of the furlough, though, we have started to, that is the question. Are we going to reopen facilities? That was something that was brought up. Is that something that we want to move forward with? Do we have capacity to move forward with? Our libraries have started to operate. Does that change things? I do think that we need a stopgap furlough plan, knowing that this will not be the furlough plan. Whether the current one we have in place is the correct one is, I think that's a question. How have things changed? How are things changing? Are we just going to be in a holding pattern? I don't know. I think those are some broader conversations. I'm glad that I get this presentation again on Wednesday after I've had time to chew on it for a couple days. So perhaps I'll have more thoughts there, but I agree with the thought that we need to see what the service level is going to look like before we make some of these bigger decisions. Although I would say hiring freeze, that's probably one that I feel confident that I would like to explore at this point. Stopping any funding on supplies, on travel, on conferences. Yes, I think that those are some of the easy decisions. So in terms of providing input for that, I am in favor of those things. I'm in favor of looking at some of those long-term disposing of property, seeing when we can get an infusion of funds in the next 6 to 9 months. But for some of these bigger decisions, especially when we are talking about salary cuts or long-term furloughs, I would really like to see what those service levels are and having those conversations with the department heads.
Thank you. I agree. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Is my hand up?
No, but I just want to hear what you're thinking. And then I'll call on Lindell.
Well, I mean, I kind of assumed that all the pieces like hiring freezes and freezing spending, we didn't talk about contracts, but I'm assuming that's falling into that same category. Is that correct? Okay. Those are already in play. I just assumed that was kind of how we were moving forward. To extend the furlough in this next month, I still don't understand the service levels like my colleague was talking about. If we are changing how the facilities will be opening or not, that will help us to better structure what we're considering for furloughs for a month, right? It's a month period that have this gap before we look into 21.
Right. Yes.
Well, Councilor Beta, I was trying to point this out. We're going to have more than a gap if we don't make a decision about August before July, because we're going to have to give 28 days notice in July if that's when we make these service level decisions, and then it won't be implemented till the end of August. So then we'll have that month where either everyone comes back without a furlough, or
well, but necessarily, because if the departments come back before that and they cut positions because the service levels, they determine they don't need certain, then we may not have that.
So Councilor Beta, a layoff requires the same notice.
Okay.
The other thing is, well, it kind of sounds like we're budgeting every month. That's how I'm feeling. Is that how it's being structured? Like we have to do these budgets every month because of this timeline that we're.
Yeah, but Counselor and Mr. Chair, I
Go
mean,
ahead.
we're budgeting every month, but first you gotta contract it to an enormous degree, and then we'll budget every month.
Right.
Based on what the reality is. I mean, the problem is, as has been stated, is we have no baseline to go from. We have no historical data to go from. We're budgeting in, we're basically blind moving forward in the dark. We have no idea what we're dealing with. I mean, well, it's not completely true. We know we're dealing with $100 million shortfall, but maybe it's a little more, maybe it's a little less. So you got it. First, you got to contract everything, and then we're going to have to month look and see if we were right.
Right, and the union contracts, they've contemplated this because there's a way you do it, and then you bring them back also as you do start to grow. There's, so, I mean, we're not reinventing the wheel in a sense when it comes to that. Just because we make a tough decision or the departments have to, and because we got to balance the budget. You're right, Councilor Merrill. Doesn't mean in September, October, November, we don't start bringing employees back. We could.
But
Council,
also, you want
go
to
ahead.
hear from, I mean, I feel like I'm actually like feeling a little overwhelmed and tired and not feeling like I can make good decisions on a Zoom call that's like inundated with information. And then we kind of got this like a little bit more clarity on what you were asking for tonight at the end. And so I don't think it would be conducive to just like think about right at this moment, other things that we want to consider. I don't know if you want us to just get back to you individually.
That'd be great.
Or actually it would be helpful to kind of summarize some of the things that we didn't answer tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I kept notes, and maybe we need to wrap this up. But as far as the hiring freeze, we want a list of the 200 positions by department so that we could get an idea of what we're talking about. There's a gap between 17 million and 19 million. What makes up that gap? We talked a little bit about comparisons to other cities, for large cities, or for the big picture. Rio Rancho and the cities in New Mexico may not make a lot of sense. Are there cities that do make sense? And again, this is related to the one employee per 1,000 residents. As far as pay cuts versus furloughs, what are the pros and cons? I think Councilor Villarreal talked about what is the union's position. So that would be helpful to know. The library services, rec centers, what does a reduction in service look like there? So, I mean, I guess I would ask the mayor and Jarrell before we wrap up, what is it that what else do you need us to do this evening?
No, I don't think we need, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. And I understand the length and the complexity and the frustration and the lateness of the hour. So I'm not going to go on very long. I think it would be very useful overnight to go back to the question about some form of a pay cut, whether it is a so-called draconian one or a moderate one. If you look at the way organizations deal with financial adversity, all organizations, before they start trying to make decisions about service levels, they take a pay cut. It's just common sense.
Right.
We say to each other, we cannot afford to continue to pay ourselves or our employees what we've been making. It's unsustainable. And therefore, as a first effort at both good faith and good common sense, we're going to adopt a pay cut. As we go forward, we're going to take on the choices that you all have already started to come to terms with tonight about service levels, about facilities, about employees. That work will come to you as our department heads sort through the options. And you will be able to say, using your personal and political and value-based decisions, I don't think everybody should take a 42% pay cut. That doesn't make any sense. Some people should take less, or we should find a way to find new revenues so that there is a different way to balance it. But you can't get to that until that work is produced. What we do know is that the rate of pay that we have been blessed to be able to provide to ourselves and our employees is out of context for where we are right now. And so the reason to start with that is because it is, I believe, simply common sense to say, it's not going to solve our problem. It's not $100 million worth of a pay cut, but it is inevitable. And so let's get that out of the way as a first step. We may come back and revisit it in the course of the budget and say, well, we didn't do it right, or we didn't get it quite equal. But I think it makes more sense to get guidance from you all about a pay cut that is inevitable and is fair and equitable and recognizes that our current pay levels are not in conjunction with current economic realities. If we could take that vote, I think we will continue to move forward on whittling away at the $100 million number. And we will also, I believe, be acting responsibly as we step up to these increasingly difficult decisions, because they are only going to get more difficult when we look at service levels and then what happens with personnel and ongoing benefits and pay and positions in the future. So to me, the logic is there. We just have to decide what kind of a pay cut makes the most sense for right now.
Mr. Chair, Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, I mean, so I guess, I mean, one way to do this would be to say, I'm not quite sure how you cut pay and then you bring it back. So if we're saying that there's this like middle period between the end of this fiscal year and the moment when we have a budget, the end of July, if we say we cut department director salaries by 10%, which I think is on this slide, and we do that for the month of July, while we develop the budget to see where we really need to be in terms of pay cuts and or furloughs, maybe that's worth thinking about. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I guess.
Because I don't know that we can cut salaries, you know, which obviously, I mean, are we cutting salaries for this little period before we have a budget? Or are we cutting salaries down the road? And the question is, if we're cutting them for the next fiscal year, which is really also in this little period when we don't have a budget, like, I don't know how you cut salaries and then go back and say, oh no, we didn't mean to cut your salary. You can be paid more. I don't know how you do that.
I don't see that happening. I mean, I think you've raised a potentiality that is not going to happen. I think what's going to happen is we're going to cut salary. In my mind, if it meets with the approval of the governing body, I would prefer to vote to cut salaries right now and say this is the new reality, and then look at the service levels that you've all quite accurately and importantly focused on and say, now we're going to look at service levels, and it will be the next kind of reduction that will try to get us to the next level of balancing the budget. I don't see us suddenly discovering that we cut salaries too much.
Well, I think that's what you said.
I think
go back.
I think oh, you mean go even lower? When you say go back.
That's what you meant.
I think we are going to have to do all of the above.
Yeah.
And I guess what I'm saying is the sooner we accept the reality that we're going to have to do all of the above, and that a pay cut for all of us is in the cards, and that's how most organizations of any size begin the process of cutting back on their expenditures. if we can agree on a plan for a salary cut that feels equitable, fair, reasonable, doesn't overshoot the mark, but does represent the new reality we're in, if that guidance would be something you could help with, I think that is a decision that the sooner we take it, the better.
But the problem is, how do you know whether it overshoots the mark when you don't have the other pieces in play? That's the problem.
When I say overshoot the mark, I don't mean financially. I mean in terms of what we think our values will allow us to do. We're not going to close the gap with a pay cut. We have to try to it's the decision we unanimously voted on for the insurance vote the other night. What felt like a fair balance between trying to be economic and trying to be humane and reasonable and decent people. And that's going to be the balancing act for the entire process of building this budget. So we know we're going to have to take a pay cut. How do you structure it to be as economic as possible and also as humane, fair, and equitable as possible? That's going to be every single one of our decisions as we build this budget.
But can we even do that? Because again, or maybe that should be done within the departments, because then again, we don't know what people make within each department and what impact it's going to have from department to department. Unless it's not that complicated. But when you look at option 1, that totally isn't going to work. Maybe option 4, where it's just 15 across the board and 20 for directors, and we start there. That's what I would say. That I think in order, because if we start going into tiering it, and then it's just going to cause all kinds of problems.
Well, I think you're all thinking about this really hard, and it is complicated and it is late. But Mr. Chairman, to my mind, that what you just said is the kind of guidance and direction that would be incredibly useful. If individually or collectively, and there will be 2 more of these conversations tomorrow night and Wednesday night. So you'll all have another chance to both hear it and ask questions that didn't immediately occur tonight. The guidance I feel that you could really provide us is that kind of policy direction. Don't make it complicated, keep it simple, get it done, and move on to the more nuanced issues of service levels and staffing levels.
And so, Mayor, you'd rather have a pay cut than a furlough? I mean, that's what it sounds like. You talked about pay cut for the last 5-10 minutes.
See, and what I would think, and maybe
and I don't disagree with it. I mean,
Yeah.
I think right. It's a new reality. Maybe we are paying our employees too much. So let's do that and not even discuss the furlough.
We're not paying them too much, Mr. Chairman, but we're paying them too much for right now.
Right.
And that's the harsh truth. And I think we are, I hate to be this, I don't know if it's pessimistic or just reality based, but I think we're going to have to talk about all of the above. And to Councilor Maraworth's point, we're going to have to do it over and over and over again. We're going to have to do it, if not monthly, at least quarterly. Councilor Casas Sanchez, you very patiently raised your hand and I talked right through you. I apologize. And it's not even my meeting.
Go
No,
ahead.
that's okay. I think what I was going to say is I think one of the challenges that through this conversation is we kind of started using pay cuts and furloughs interchangeably, which is where it starts to make it hard when we're looking at service level. Because if we're talking
Right.
about furloughs and service level, that's a very different conversation than pay cuts. And so
That's
I just wanted to pull that apart as we are looking at this, that those are 2 very different things that mean very different, when, they have very different things to consider as we are looking at both the next 2 months and the next 12. That was all. And also wanted to confirm that we're going to see this tomorrow and Wednesday, which.
Okay, well, it's gonna be 9 o'clock. So, I mean, it's good discussion. I mean, there was a lot of things I hadn't thought about before this meeting that I'm thinking about now. I'll share my opinions. I think tomorrow, I'll share my opinion tomorrow at Public Works, and then hopefully, and then as quality of life meets, hopefully it gets a little clearer. as we get through this week. But I think one thing I did learn is furloughs are definitely different than pay cuts now. And so I was advocating for furloughs, but now it's kind of like maybe pay cuts, maybe that's what we do first, because you're talking about hours and as opposed to salary. So maybe you can keep things open because you have the same level of staff. It's just you're saving money by cutting their salary and not their hours. So I guess to be continued. Thank you. Any committee members want to share any last words?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I would
Council.
suggest for staff to really cut to the chase if you're going to really want some answers and some like specifics. And this fluffy stuff, I know they're like details we need, but some of it we've already seen in past meetings and we don't need to see it again. And we don't need to spend a lot of time at some of those slides before, and just cut to the chase and go to where we need to go, because I feel like there's a lot of time we spent like, okay, here we go. I like the information. It's great. But then we weren't even supposed to have a presentation on the survey results. That wasn't on the agenda. And that took some time, a good chunk of time that I think we were going to hear about it in our other committees anyway. So I'm just letting you know for staff for the next committee meetings, cut to the chase, because we have a lot. If we have this week to figure it out, then we might as well just go to where we need to go right away. Thank you.
But Counselor, I just have to chime in. Sometimes you got to have some of this context in order to be able
I
to
agree
understand.
with context, but there's some stuff that was fluff that we don't need. There was too much time spent on certain things when we need to just cut to the chase and get to where we need to be and make decisions. So there's some context that's good, and there's others that we didn't get to the point where we needed to tonight, and it went too long.
Okay. So with that, are there any matters from staff? Mary?
Mr. Chairman, no other matters for discussion this evening from staff.
Okay, matters from the committee? Nothing? Okay, again, thank you all. I think, like I said, we talked a lot, that's for sure. But okay, we're adjourned. Good night.